Hello and welcome. I am Matt Roddy, and this is the Greater Prescott podcast, where we talk about, you guessed it, all things Greater Prescott. Today, I want to welcome my guest, Dale O'Dell. Dale, thank you very much for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Tell everyone what you do, Dale.
I'm a photographer, a digital artist, and a writer. Have been my entire life. I started off in the darkroom in the analog days of film and rode the technological wave to where we are today, and still have a darkroom that I use for storing inkjet supplies.
Do you really?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
I still have the darkroom. If somebody ever offers me enough money, I'll go in and make them a chemical print. But I just store the inkjet supplies. And
When was the last time that happened?
Did
someone offer? Yeah.
Well,
that you did that for someone.
Actually, that hasn't really happened. I think the last time, I think it's been 10 or 12 years since I made a black and white print in the darkroom. I can't say that I miss it, but I do a little bit. I mean, I like the speed and the immediacy of digital. Digital printing is remarkably unsexy because it's basically a software application and the pushing of a button.
Yep.
Whereas in the darkroom, back in the day, your darkroom skills really separated the amateurs from the professionals. And I enjoyed the darkroom. Yeah. I was a darkroom geek. So.
Yep, which we are going to get more into, which will help tell the story.
Okay.
Of how you ended up doing some things like this. These are also pieces you'll talk about. These are some of your newest pieces. We will touch on that as well.
Okay, yeah, this is the new stuff I'm working on that is occupying my time.
Good.
And when you're ready, we'll get to that.
Okay.
But yeah, this is what I'm excited about right now.
Well, like I always say, kick it off. Where were you born and raised? What did you do when you were a kid? And kick the story off.
Oh, God. Well, you're going to bring up a place I haven't been in a long time. I'm originally from Texas.
Okay.
I was born in Dallas. And so I spent the first 10, 12 years of my life moving around.
Okay.
Born in Dallas, lived in Fort Worth, lived in Dayton, Ohio, lived in Wichita, Kansas.
Okay.
My brother was born in Kansas. Lived in Jackson, Michigan.
Okay.
And then around 1970, my family moved back to Texas, to Houston.
Okay.
And they stayed there. And so that's where I ended up going to junior high, high school.
Okay.
Went to college in Texas and tried like hell to find a job any place but Texas. And in 82, when I graduated college, ended up right back in Texas where I didn't want to be. It took me a few more years to get out of there and get myself to Arizona.
Funny. What'd you do when you were a kid, when you were bouncing around to all these places?
Oh, God. Well, my earliest memories were Kansas.
Okay.
And my brother was born in Kansas, and he was kind of a sick kid. He had issues, some pretty major health issues as a youngster. And so my folks pretty much devoted all their time to him.
Yeah, makes sense.
And they even shipped me off to Arkansas to live with my grandparents for a while.
Okay.
And they sent me to all kinds of art classes. After school. It's like, let's get Dale out of the house, we'll take care of the other kid. And so they signed me up for mostly art classes, drawing, painting, and that sort of stuff. And so between that experience and living with my grandparents, because my grandmother was a painter.
Okay.
And so I was in kindergarten when I lived in Arkansas with the grandparents. And the neat thing that I noticed as just a little guy was that when my grandma would take me to kindergarten, it was like, a half a day. It was like, 9 to noon, something
morning
like that.
or afternoon class.
So she would take me to school, and when we would leave the house, there would be a blank canvas on the easel.
Okay.
She would pick me up, and a lot of times we'd go to McDonald's for lunch, big treat for a little kid. And we'd get back to the house after noon, and I would see that white canvas was 2/3 finished.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was just fascinating because it would go from nothing to something. And she would often work on a piece for a couple of days, and so I would see this develop. So between observing my grandma, who was not a great painter, she was strictly an amateur, but she worked at it.
Yep.
You know, she's like a lot of my musician friends who never cut an album, never really performed, but when they came home from work, they went down to the basement and they played,
Yes.
you know, and they worked on their craft and got better at it. And she was that type. And then later on, when the family moved to Michigan, my folks did the same thing, is send Dale off to art classes and stuff. And I learned that I could draw okay.
Okay.
I was not much of a painter. I like sculpture a little bit. I like 3D art. I've done some 3D art. But I wasn't really great at it.
Okay.
But at the same time, and this is the mid to late 60s. My father worked for a company that was a NASA contractor during the heyday of the Gemini and Apollo program.
Okay.
And so my dad would literally leave the house Monday morning and fly to the Cape, spend the week, and it was Cape Kennedy.
Okay.
It was Cape Canaveral, and then it was Cape Kennedy after the assassination. Now it's back to Canaveral.
Okay.
But he would go to the Cape, spend the week there, and then he would be back on the weekends. And he would always bring home material, the aluminum bits and little parts and things that they were using to
show you guys.
Yeah, Okay. It was like
show
stuff
and tell.
It was basically junk, you know.
To them it was.
To them,
yes.
yeah. But anyway, he would bring this stuff home, and I was really intrigued by this.
Yep.
And so it really piqued my interest in science.
Okay.
He brought home all the patches, you know, and the pins and all the really cool things.
Yes.
And then eventually, I think I met 5 of the 7 Mercury astronauts.
No way.
Yeah. As a kid, I met.
Oh my gosh.
I met Gus Grissom and Alan Shepard and God.
That is
was it Walter White?
Really special.
Gordon Cooper was a very cool dude. I remember
Okay.
really being impressed with the stories he was telling. And so these guys, you know, they were national heroes, you know, back in the day. And so just to meet these guys, to see what they were doing, and to basically, you know, realize that these guys are just sitting in tiny little tin cans on the top of a intercontinental ballistic missile.
Yes.
You know, I mean, the Mercury, Redstone, and Atlas, I mean, that was direct, you know, from, you know, missile technology. And I was just really, really enthusiastic about the science. And so I was this geeky kid that was into art, but it was also, I had a chemistry set. And so I'd go down to the basement, blow stuff up, you know, start firing.
Awesome.
You know, do fun stuff like that.
Thanks, Mom and Dad.
So, yeah. So I was a weird kid in that I wasn't into sports. But I was into science. I was into chemistry. I was into art.
Yeah.
So, you know, I had a lot of fun with that.
So how does that transition into what you did to become an artist? I mean, just keep going along that path.
Well, the funny thing is fast forward to you know, senior year of high school when you're like choosing what college you want to go to, if you're going to go, or what you're going to do. You know, and there's a backstory to this I'll get to, but anyway, I want to be in the arts. You know, I want to go to college. I want to pursue a degree in the arts. Yeah. And my parents were like, "What the hell is wrong with you?" You know, it's like, well, you sent me to art classes for like 15 years.
Yeah, right.
You know, why is this a surprise to you? You know, but they had a different motivation than I did.
Of course,
it was like, get the kid out of the house. But no, we moved to, right around 1970, it was pretty obvious that the Apollo program was going to wind down really fast. What they had planned for post-moon landings all went out the window.
Okay.
And you can read all the conspiracy theory stuff about Armstrong and Aldrin seeing weird things on the moon and being told not to come back and all that stuff. But it stopped really fast.
Okay.
And my dad lost his job.
Gotcha.
And ended up moving to Houston, Texas, and getting into the hydraulics business.
Okay.
Hoses and fittings and, you know, brake lines and industrial equipment like that. And so we moved to Houston, and I still was like not a sports kid. I was never a sports kid. Drove my parents crazy. because they really wanted a typical
right
little boy. Before we continue with photography, I'll tell you how bad I am at sports.
Let's hear it.
So one summer, my mom decided instead of sending little Dale off to art school, she would send me to baseball camp.
Okay.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
It was awful. So we were living in Jackson, Michigan at the time, which is a small town south of Lansing, west of Detroit.
Okay.
So she sends me off to baseball camp at the YMCA. And it's like, man, I don't want to do this. I can't run. I can't hit. I can't catch. I suck at this. I know I suck at it.
Right.
So first day, she drops me off at the YMCA, and it's raining that day. So we couldn't go out on the baseball field. So we're in the gym, and it's a big gym. There's like 4 basketball courts in there. And so they divided all the kids up into groups of 2, and we're basically just playing catch.
Okay.
Back and forth. Now, this is the 60s, so coaching primarily meant yelling at the kids.
Okay.
We don't have any of this. There was none of this wokeness or sensitivity. There's none of that, They would just yell at you, And so that was my first turn off. It's like, if I'm going to have a guy.
Come on.
Yeah, if I'm going to have a guy yell at me, I go home.
When you're in the art studio, no one's yelling at you.
No, everything is subjective, And so they've divided us up, and we're throwing the ball back and forth. I'm throwing at this kid. And I realized really quickly, the harder I threw the ball, the less accuracy I had.
Okay.
So the next thing I know,
makes sense.
I'm there to learn how to do this, right? And I got a guy yelling at me, and now he's yelling at me for not throwing the ball hard enough. And so I'm trying to explain to this guy that there's an inversely proportionate relationship between the speed I throw the ball and where it goes,
and the accuracy.
And this guy yells at me, and so I threw that ball at that kid as hard as I could, and I beamed the coach.
Oh.
I mean, boom, right in the face. And boom, the dude goes down. And I'm like, oh, crap, I am in trouble. Yeah. They're going to think that I did this on purpose, And I'm still trying to explain to this guy.
I can't throw a ball very well.
So they attend to him, and no one ever really figured out where the ball came from, so no one yelled at me.
Oh.
I didn't get in any trouble or anything like that, but I had decided at that point.
You've lived with this for a
Dale
long time.
Doesn't like this, yeah. And so that was pretty much the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the way out, I noticed there's a door in the back of the gym that it's like held open with it, like somebody put a trash can there. Okay. They're trying to just get a little breeze, across there. And I look at that door, and I know that door goes to the alley behind the YMCA, and 2 blocks down the road is the little city park.
Okay.
So I had a thought. So the next day, Mom's like, all right, come on, I'm going to take you to baseball practice. So I grabbed my baseball mitt.
You load up.
I got my lunch, and I grabbed a paperback science fiction book. Because I was a sci-fi geek.
Yeah.
My dad with NASA and all that. Yeah. And so I grabbed this book, and because I've always been a reader, and the great thing about little pocket paperbacks, you can stick them in your pocket, So Mom drops me off at the YMCA, and typically she got me there a little bit early, like my mom always did. So, and the procedure was you go in the building, you sign in, and then you go in the gym and you wait for, the class to start. Well, what I did is I went in the building, I signed in, I walked all the way through the gym and out that door in the back, and I went down the block to the park. And I always had a watch, even though I was a little kid, I liked watches. Yeah. And so when it came time for baseball camp to be over with, I would go back to the YMCA, go back in the back door, intermingle with all the kids, sign out. Mom would pick me up. How was baseball today, Dale? Oh, it was great.
Oh, my goodness.
I did this all summer long. I never attended a baseball class.
How long until you told your mom this?
Yeah, I never told my family, but later on that year, they started to figure it out because, it was like a year later, I guess.
Oh, my goodness.
We had gone on vacation, and We had a lake house at this place called Houghton Lake.
Okay.
And it's like the largest inland lake in Michigan. It's like smack dab in the middle of the state.
Oh, okay.
Not one of the Great Lakes, but
Yep.
a big, big lake. And a lot of families, and so one day this impromptu softball game starts up.
Great.
And it's, I don't know, 6th, 7th inning, and my dad is noticing that Dale struck out every time. Dale didn't catch the ball. Dale threw the ball past the guy at first base, and
Yeah.
and he just made this offhand comment.
Yep.
It's like, why do we send you to baseball camp? And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, why did you? So that was my whole sporting experience thing. Never figured it out. I read a lot of good sci-fi that summer.
I bet you had a great summer.
It was great. In fact, I would go to this park, and they had, all kinds of, jungle gyms and stuff to play on. And I'll never forget, there was this big concrete turtle.
Yep.
And so and you could climb on it or under it.
Okay.
And some days it would rain. So I would go under that turtle.
There you are.
And my little book, I got my sack
goodness.
lunch, and it was great.
Yeah.
And I remember a couple of times I would look down at the road and I'd see my mom like driving to the grocery store or something, She had no
Obviously,
idea.
she had no
clue I was in
goodness.
the park. And so that was my whole sporting experience. My younger brother ultimately played Little League, which turned out to be a good thing for me because in 1972, I got this gift for Christmas. And my folks never really got a handle on what I was into or, who I really was. And so I got a lot of weird gifts. And now we're living in Texas at this point.
Okay.
And so, I got a gun for Christmas one year. It's like, what is a 12-year-old going to do?
You can't paint with a gun.
With a 22, But I got this cool gift in 72, and it was this develop your own pictures kit.
Okay.
And
now we're talking.
Yeah, now we're talking. Right. And so, and I'm sure my folks were thinking, because I got into the chemistry sets, and, the bug collecting kits, they would buy kits.
Yes.
And I'm sure they bought this thing thinking, I'd play with it once, and it ended up in the closet, Didn't work out that way. I got the thing, and it had, little packets of chemistry and a little tank for developing film, everything you needed. No enlarger, just a little contact printer. So you'd make a print the size of the negative.
Gotcha.
And so I go to the library at school. I check out a couple of books. One of them's about the chemistry of photography, and the other one is black and white photos by this guy, Ansel Adams.
Oh.
I had no idea who Ansel Adams was. Really pretty pictures, Yosemite and that kind of thing. And so I say to my dad, it's like, well, this is great, but in order to develop film, I have to first take pictures. And in order to take pictures, I need a camera.
Yes.
And Dad's like, oh, God. Forgot about that little detail, So my mom scrounges up some little brownie camera, and I get on my Schwinn bicycle and head off to the drugstore and buy a roll of black and white film.
Okay.
This kit was for black and white. The color is way more complex. You generally don't develop color film in the bathroom.
Okay.
And so I bought a roll of black and white film and loaded up this little camera and went out and took pictures. And our family was real typical Kodak consumer in that they'd load a roll at Christmas. They'd shoot Christmas and the birthdays during the year, and they'd finish up that roll of film the next Christmas, and then we'd go off to
That's hilarious.
That's how Kodak basically sold a lot of film.
Yeah.
They just assumed that, it's going to age in the camera.
Makes sense.
During that year, and that's why there was professional film that came out of the refrigerator at the camera shop, and there was the amateur film at the drugstore.
That is funny.
And so it was a completely different mindset. Now I'm riding around on my bicycle with a camera, and I'm looking for artsy things to take pictures of, So I shot that first roll of film, and I set up and this was the coolest thing because anything having to do with the laboratory, I was into.
Okay. Well, the science.
So, so I went in and I set up my little darkroom, and at that moment, my family's 2,200 square foot, 4-bedroom, 2-bath ranch style Texas home became a 2,200 square foot ranch style Texas home with only one bathroom and a darkroom.
Yes.
Dad was not pleased with that little thing either. So I processed my first roll of film just like I'd seen him do on TV with that red light.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Didn't come out. It's all black. Had to go back to the library, check out another book, and that's where I realized film has to be processed in total darkness.
Okay.
So I was back on the bicycle, off to the drugstore,
Yep,
buy
you need
another
more.
roll. Yep. Second roll comes out great.
Oh, wow.
Comes out just fine. I make little prints.
Yeah.
And I'm going. And there's
you're in heaven at this point.
I'm in heaven because it's the perfect blend of art and science.
It's a good point.
You know, the scientific part was the chemical engineering of the laboratory.
That was the bathroom.
That was the bathroom. And then the art part was going out with the camera and learning about composition and subject matter and light and that kind of stuff. So it was wonderful. And so this went on. And so now I'm like, well, now I really need a better camera, you know? And so I was really bugging my folks for a 35 millimeter camera. And so my mom scrounged up this like 1950s era Argus camera that she had.
Okay.
It wasn't a great camera, had all kinds of flaws, but it was better than this little brownie camera that I had, and it would do. And so at the same time, my younger brother, is playing Little League Baseball. And they're like, oh, you know, Dale, you need to come to the baseball games.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't want to come there. So I started going to the baseball games.
Load up the camera. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I started photographing kids in the dugout, action shots of them rounding first base. You know, I didn't have a long lens, and so forget about the center fielder.
True.
You know, everything that I shot was, you know, home plate to first base, you know. And so at the same time, I needed to make bigger prints, and so I started looking around for an enlarger.
Okay.
And you know, those little shopper newspapers you get at the grocery store. So I find this enlarger in the want ads, the little shopper paper, $25.
Okay.
So I get my mom to drive me over to this dude's house, and this guy's like 20 years old, and he's practically in tears because he just got drafted. It's the tail end of the Vietnam War, and this poor schmuck got drafted right at the end. I have no idea what happened to this dude.
Yeah.
I hope he never got deployed.
Right.
I hope he's still alive. I hope he never saw any action, you know. So he sold me his enlarger for $25, lens, everything. So I moved that into my bathroom laboratory at home, you know, and my father at this point, you know, everybody's going to the master bath, you know, for like a year. And he's like, okay, I'll make a deal with you. You get out of the bathroom, I'll build a dark room in the back corner of the garage.
Okay.
Which was no big deal because a car had never seen the interior of that garage.
That's perfect. Hey, it's like the studio.
Yeah. 2-car garage, you know, full of boxes.
Yeah.
A dozen motorcycles in various states of disrepair and restoration. And so I did the deal with Dad. Yeah, okay, I'll move out to the garage. I said, but I will not give up the bathroom until the darkroom garage is fully functional. My father never worked so.
Oh, I bet, right? You knew your dad. You were going to hold out.
So he finished that darkroom and record, and he was an above average carpenter, and so it was a pretty good darkroom. But he was not a plumber, so I had no running water. So I move out of the bathroom, and so the family now gets their bathroom back.
Yes.
And I needed to be able to wash prints, and so I devised this hairball gray water system with a garden hose.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Great.
And photographic chemistry will kill grass.
Oh, sorry, Dad.
There was a big brown spot behind the garage where I was dumping stuff. You know, but anyway, at that point, my parents, they kind of did not achieve their goal of making Dale go away to his little lab. But at the same time they did. Now, if they couldn't find me, I generally was not out getting into trouble.
Right.
I was in the dark
in the garage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting.
And so that's what got me involved in photography. Man. And I was in junior high school at this point. And when I went to high school, you know, they're like, well, you know, you had to like sign up for extracurricular stuff. You know, it's like, and I said, well, I want to take pictures. I want to work for the yearbook.
Yeah.
You know, in the school paper. And they're like, well, you can't do that until you're a junior. And I said, look, I'm really good.
Right. Yeah.
I'm
not your average.
I'm really good. And I showed him like
ninth grade.
I showed him, my 8th grade junior high school, basically baseball and bad Texas landscape portfolio. And
you had a portfolio.
What
9th graders walking in with a portfolio?
And so they let me join the journalism group.
Good job.
As a freshman instead of waiting till I was a junior. And by the time I was a sophomore, I was the head photographer, and
Makes sense.
free passes to football games and stuff,
Yep.
and so I basically started off as a high school photojournalist.
Makes perfect sense. Oh man, I love it.
So, but it was just the coolest thing because it was just this really, really great blend of art and science, and that's what I really enjoyed about it because I got good in the darkroom.
I bet you
did.
did.
It didn't take me long. And I learned about the chemistry, and I learned the tricks.
Yeah.
Different formulations.
You learn by doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I got a photo lab.
Yeah.
And so I joined camera clubs. And I got to hang out in great big labs.
Yeah.
I got to.
Great experience.
Hang out with models in studios.
Ooh.
Yeah. And just by a bizarre twist of fate, in 1976, I actually met Ansel Adams.
No kidding. Where and how'd that work out?
I was in this little camera club, and it met at this portrait photographer's studio. And my mom, who was the taxi driver, drops me off. And I'm about to walk in the building, and the photographer who was the proprietor of the portrait studio, and he was like one of the top portrait shooters in Houston, a pretty famous guy. He's walking out with this old man with a gray beard who's carrying a champagne flute. And he says, "Oh, Dale, this is Ansel Adams." And Ansel was drunk. They'd been in the studio, and he'd done some wonderful portraits of Ansel that day.
Yeah.
And they'd been drinking champagne. Ansel Adams was a champagne drinker. And he had a gig at the Museum of Fine Art that evening to do a lecture or something.
Okay.
And he had to have arrived just drunk. So I meet a drunken Ansel Adams on his way to the museum.
Go figure.
On my way in, to meet with the camera club. And it really didn't, the history of it and who he was and his importance and his bump on the timeline of photographic history wasn't really, registering with me. It was a number of years later when I got into college and I'm studying, art history, and his name comes up again, and I'm like, holy crap!
This light bulb goes off.
Yeah,
ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, and of course he'd passed by this time,
Yeah.
but I actually got to shake hands.
That's wonderful.
With the great man.
That is
So
wonderful.
that was kind of cool. Yeah.
Okay. So then, at the end of your high school years, it's time to
go to college.
Time to go to college, or not.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Well, the deal was, you maintain good grades, and your mom and dad pay for college.
Great.
And I'm not from a wealthy family or anything, and so I wanted to go to Brooks Institute, which was one of the major photographic schools in the country.
Okay.
And they were in Santa Barbara. Imagine.
If I had, are you kidding me?
But that was way out of reach financially. I had to go to an in-state school. First of all, Brooks was a private school.
Okay.
And then any other like out-of-state schools, there's out-of-state tuition, which is higher. So there was 2 colleges in Texas where you could get an actual degree in photography in the 1970s and 80s. And that was East Texas State University up near Dallas, and there's the college I went to in Huntsville, Texas, called Sam Houston State University.
Okay.
So I went to Sam Houston State to study photography, and thinking that I had the blessings of my family, who said they were supportive, but they really weren't. They really didn't want their kid going into the arts.
It also sounds like fairly hard footsteps to follow in terms of your dad. I mean, here's your dad. At one point, he's working for NASA and et cetera.
His role, he wasn't like, in the spaceship.
Was he a machine guy?
No, he was a sales guy.
Okay.
He was a sales guy. So he was, he worked with the engineers, but he was not himself an engineer.
Okay.
He was not, twisting wrenches,
Gotcha.
putting parts of the Apollo command module together.
Okay.
And I didn't realize that it took literally it took decades for me to figure out what they had done while I was in college to dissuade me from going into the arts.
Gotcha.
Actually, I didn't even learn this until I read some of my father's correspondence after he passed.
Okay.
You know, because I went to college for, I started in, well, let's say I graduated high school in 77.
Okay.
So I started in college in the fall of 77. And so I did 4 semesters. And the summer between what would have been my sophomore and junior year, you know, Dad sits me down and has this conversation about how they don't have any more money and I'm going to have to drop out of school. And it was very, very upsetting, you know, because I was not a great student. I was a straight A student in my major.
Of course.
Photography. But math and history, I didn't really care about. I didn't try very hard. And so I was a C student.
Okay.
And after my freshman year, and then in my sophomore year, I really started figuring out, I gotta make better grades in the other classes. And so I brought it up to a 3.0.
Yeah.
At the end of my sophomore year, and then I got the rug pulled out from under me. And I didn't learn. So my father put it to me in terms of finances, and I didn't learn, for decades that actually that was a maneuver to dissuade me from continuing in photography.
Gotcha.
It's like, well, maybe if he goes out and works for a while, he'll. All it did is made me that much more determined to.
I would say more hungry to follow your passion.
Yeah, and so I spent a year and a half out of school, living at home, which was a miserable situation for a 20-year-old. But I worked in a photo lab.
Okay.
And let's see, my first job was in a photo lab, and I was my very first job in the lab. All I did was monitor a color print machine. I literally stood at the end of this machine.
That sounds boring.
It was terrible. I just made sure that these long rolls of prints rolled up properly, and then when it ended, take it over to the person who cut them apart. And I convinced them that I could print black and white.
Yeah.
So I got bumped up to the custom black and white lab, which I liked. There's a fellow in this lab who I don't know what his deal was. He had some kind of mental disability. Yeah. And the other people in the lab, kind of bullied him and made fun of him. But he was a really good black and white printer, and he would show me all the little tricks.
Okay.
That he'd figured out. You know, and so I kind of befriended this guy who was kind of ostracized by the rest of the people in the company. And I got even better.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
And I did that for a while, and then I got a job in a studio as an assistant.
Nice.
Yeah. And boy, I applied for this job.
By the way, this is very funny because your folks are basically telling, like, hey, you can't go. We're not paying for your school anymore. And where do you go right to? What you love.
Yeah. Oh, I went even more hardcore.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't have done these things.
That's true.
I would have just gone straight through, and I would have graduated a year sooner than I did.
Yes.
But I did pick up a lot of experience because I bet you did. So I got a job in the studio as an assistant, and one of the things I did was process slide film.
Okay.
I'd gotten really good with what Kodak. It was called the E6 process. There was 2 kinds of slide film processes back in the day. There was what's called E6, and then there was Kodachrome.
All right.
And Kodachrome was invented in the 30s. It was one of the original color films, and it was a very different kind of film than every other kind of film on the market.
Okay.
To this day, Kodachrome slides have a value that Ektachromes or Fujichromes don't have. There was just the chemical formulation and the actual physical formulation of the film was very unique. And so to process Kodachrome, you had to have a license from Kodak, and you had to have a resident chemist.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was a very complicated process. The alternative to that was called E4, and then it evolved into E6.
Okay.
And it was about a 9 or 10 step process, and I got very good at that. And that was like the last thing I did in college before I went out to work. And so I took what little knowledge I had, and I ran the E6 lab in the studio. And of course, we didn't run film all day long.
Right.
And the studio had one principal photographer, and he was this big, fat French gay guy.
Okay.
Who I don't know his educational background, but he had a very interesting style of lighting products. And so I really went to school on this guy. Really nice guy, very open, very generous with his time.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it wasn't one of those secretive type of guys,
Yes.
And his name was Wilburn.
Wilburn. Good job, Wilburn.
Yeah. So basically, one of our major clients at the time was Coca-Cola Foods Division.
Okay.
And so at least once a week we would have a big food shoot. And so so the studio brought in freelance food stylists.
Okay.
Any of the food you see in advertising, either in magazines or on television, is completely unedible. These food stylists know more tricks to make food look good. You will never get a hamburger from Burger King that looks anything like that hamburger in the commercial.
What a surprise.
Yeah. Another thing that we did was small products that would fit on a tabletop.
Okay.
And in college, lighting class, everybody hated having the assignment when it came along to light glassware.
That's tough.
Or shiny objects.
Yeah.
And if you could do that, you could pretty much photograph anything. And I learned how to do that on the job. So I got paid to learn how to do that. And then another thing we did is, of course, this is all done with computer modeling in 3D now, but we worked with architects.
Okay.
Of course, Houston, Texas, pretty much was built in the 60s and 70s. There was an old joke. It was there's like Gerald Hines was like the major architect.
Okay.
It was like the city Gerald Hines built, the Tenneco building, the Pennzoil building, those trapezoidal shaped black buildings, they're pretty iconic, and so we worked with a number of architectural firms because the process was that when they were pitching to build a building on a site, they'd start off with drawings.
Yep.
And then if that got approved, they would go to models.
I'll say the next step up.
Right. And so these guys would bring in these big architectural models, very, very detailed.
Yep.
And then Wilburn would rear project skies or the Houston skyline behind it. And then instead of using one big soft light, he would use one of those, but it would be dialed way back, and he would use like 20 small little lights.
Yeah.
Just to highlight different parts of the building.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was beautiful. It was as if it was lit by the street lights on site.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very intricate, very detailed. And this is all shot on 8x10 film, with great big cameras.
Yeah.
And so basically he would be standing behind and he wouldn't even bring in the camera until the thing was lit.
Makes sense.
He would just stand there and say, put a light here, put a light there, put a light. And some of the times he didn't know. And he would say, well, take this light off the stand and just walk around with it. Oops, sorry about that. And so I would walk around with a light, and he'd say, stop there. Okay, put it on the light stand there. Crank it up 50%. Yeah. And we'd have these beautiful photos.
Oh, I bet.
And so I learned so much from this guy.
That is wonderful.
And so I took what I learned there and I got another job. And so I had 3 jobs before I earned enough money to go back to college.
Okay.
It was the photo lab job, the studio job, and then the last job I had, I was an audio visual special effects technician.
How's the video come into all this?
I'm sorry. Audio visual.
Visual. Gotcha.
Not video.
No.
Although there was a little bit of video
Audio,
involved.
visual. Okay.
In other words, we did great big slideshows.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember back in the pre-digital days or even in the movie theaters, a lot of times they would have a slide presentation going before the movie started. Like local advertisers would have a slide, here's the restaurant,
Yep.
So one of the things I did in the studio, aside from assisting Wilburn with studio photography and running E6 slide film, is they had this big giant camera called a 4-ox, and it was an animation camera. It was basically the technology that George Lucas used to shoot the original Star Wars movie.
Really?
Yes. It was a big camera. It had a rack and pinion system. It was motorized. It would fill up your entire studio here.
Whoa.
And I learned how to use this thing.
Okay.
And we use that to create business graphics, title slides for slide presentations.
Yeah.
And I really took to that. And so I started staying late. And I developed another portfolio using that camera, using the same kind of techniques that we would use to generate a title slide or a pie chart or something like that. I was making really high-tech looking pictures.
You had an amazing access.
I did.
And you took advantage of it.
I did. You know, if there was a pretty girl, she was going to be a model. If they had a cool camera, I'm going to learn how to use that thing.
Yeah.
If they had something in the dark room that I hadn't seen before, I'm going to figure that thing out. So I built up this really neat portfolio of special effect works, which I took to an audio-visual company, and I got a job working on a similar type of camera called an Oxberry.
Okay.
There were 3 types of animation cameras back in the day. There was this 4-ox camera, there was an Oxberry, and there was another one called a Sickles. Actually, there was 4 because there was another company called Marin Carroll.
All right.
All these guys are out of business. They're all gone.
Yeah.
But these are big cameras that used 100-foot rolls of film. They had close-up lenses on them. They were motorized. You could move the camera up and down, and it had a rack and pinion system that would keep with the bellows that would keep your artwork that you're photographing in focus as you move the camera. So you remember the original Star Wars when they do that leap into hyperspace the first time? They hit light speed and all the streaks of the stars. I learned how to do that before Star Wars came out. Yeah. I had, the light speed.
You should have been George Lucas.
I should have. If I had gone to Brooks Institute and was in California, I could have easily ended up at Industrial Light and Magic down the road.
Makes sense.
So anyway, I took that work and I went to this audiovisual company, and all they did were these huge slides, and usually they were for real estate developers. And so there were more architectural models involved, and so I took everything I learned there and applied it here.
Interesting.
Plus, I did all this special effect work, and I think the biggest thing I worked on was a 16 projector show with 2 16-millimeter movie cameras. Or movie projectors. Mm-hmm. And they were for real estate developers, and basically, well, you probably never attended a rock concert in the 70s, did you?
Correct.
Well, if you went to a Pink Floyd concert or a Genesis concert or a Yes concert, there were slides going in the background. There was either abstract things, of just oil bubbles and lights, or for some of them there was like a whole story going on. Yeah. It never quite worked right. But
not surprising.
The stoned audience never caught on.
Exactly.
It never worked anyway. But huge technology. So we've got these banks and banks of Kodak slide projectors with carousels on all of them, and they're all computer controlled, and they're programmed, to fade in and fade out, and to switch to 16-millimeter film, and complicated stuff. Really, really complicated stuff. But I really, really enjoyed it. And so by the time I was determining that I'd saved up enough money. This is the early, this is 79, 80, 81 era.
All right.
If you know anybody that had like a car loan in like 1980, they were paying like 18%.
I'll say it wasn't that huge inflation or huge interest rates.
I was dating this girl, and she was kind of a rich kid, and I'm over at her house one evening, and her dad worked for one of the oil companies. He was a well-to-do guy. And I'm telling them the story about how I got to quit college and everything. And this was a big Catholic family that really valued education. Every kid not only had a degree, but an advanced degree, And her dad is like, listen to this story. And he's like, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to work my ass off, live at home, save money, and my plan, and then pay for the rest of my college myself. He goes, let me give you the name of my broker. And so he gives me his broker's name. I go down and meet this guy in downtown Houston in one of those big skyscrapers. So he sets me up. Okay. And this is when money markets were paying 17, 18%. and it was rolling over like every 60, 90 days. So I was investing like 95% of my paycheck in money market and then rolling over the interest.
Okay.
And so probably the best financial decisions I ever made in my life,
right?
Including today. It's just not like that anymore. The girlfriend's father was very impressed. My own father was not so impressed because he knew I was going to spend that money on more photography stuff. And so I went back to college in, what was it?
81, 82, 83.
81. I started, beginning of 81.
Okay.
And I went back and so I wanted to pick up where I left off.
Yep.
And so I did one hairball thing that a lot of kids don't do as a sophomore in college. I filed my degree plan.
Okay.
All right. I knew what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I'd gone through all the minors. You have a major and a minor.
Yes.
And my first minor was going to be business.
Okay.
Then I was going to minor in art.
Okay.
And I didn't really care for that because going back to being a little kid, I still can't paint.
Yeah.
All right. And so I ended up minoring in philosophy.
Okay.
So I've got that to fall back on.
Yeah.
But because I knew my path as a sophomore, I went ahead and just did it.
It was pretty clear.
Well, unbeknownst to me, the year and a half I was out of school, the photo program had undergone a sea change from a fine art-oriented program to a commercial photography-oriented program. And I had just been out for a year and a half doing nothing but commercial photography.
Yeah.
So I was kind of in the mood to go back and do some of that weird artsy-fartsy stuff. And so I look up my old professor. And he's telling me the story about,
the change.
And it all has to do with funding, because a lot of it, came from Kodak and Fuji. And, we don't want to mess your kids up, in art school. We want you to learn how to actually take a picture. And all my friends that went to art school, none of them are as good a technicians as those of us who went to either university or trade school.
Makes sense.
They learned how to talk about it. They learned how to write artist statements using large words like deconstruction and, patriarchy and stuff like that. But they ended up being pretty mediocre photographers. And so I'm sitting here with my professor who's my advisor. And I'm like, well, I started this, and it's going to be a real bummer not to be able to finish it.
Right.
And he goes, well, the only way you could finish this, he goes, would be is if you filed a degree plan.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to.
Here you go, doctor. He's like, holy crap. He goes, you can do this. He goes, you're grandfathered in.
Okay.
And I'm like, well, how do we do this if the program has switched over to, a studio-based commercial photography program? He goes, well, you're going to get credit for a lot of those classes, but you're going to be working independently with me.
Gotcha. Oh, man. This sounds really good.
It was very good. It was very good. I mean, I was the whiz kid in college. It didn't translate after I got out because the world is much rougher than the cloistered college campus is. And so I showed him my special effects portfolio that I developed when I was working with this 4X camera and then continued to develop as I worked as an audio-visual tech. I showed him that, and he's like, okay. He goes, you're going to teach the slide class. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
He goes, well, technically you'll be the TA. He goes, but after I check roll, I'm out of there.
I was going to say, you're doing it.
He goes, your portfolio, your slide portfolio is better than mine.
Yeah. Because that's what you've done for
I've done.
a few years.
And so under his tutelage, I taught that course, and then I got to develop anything I had an interest in. I got to write a proposal for and present it to him, and 80-90% of the time he approved it. And so I'm in this group of kids that are shooting soup cans in the studio, and learning how to do butterfly lighting on a portrait, and I'm doing weird shit.
Yeah.
And then I got into color printing, that is.
Okay.
Because all the color I'd done up to this point was just slides. Color negatives, you have to make a color print.
Okay.
So then I got to learn the color darkroom, and boy, did I struggle. I had a hard time with that.
Just a steep learning curve.
I'd done so much black and white for so long that I was like seeing in black and white. And of course, the color process was much more complex and everything.
Yeah.
And then you debate. Is it a little bit too yellow? Is it a little bit too red? Is it a little bit too magenta? You've really got to learn your color theory.
Yeah.
And I had an epiphany with that because I was struggling. I was printing a portrait, and our labs were set up to where the hallway leading to the labs is where all the professors' offices were. So you could literally walk right out of a wet darkroom with a wet print in a tray to your professor's office and say, I'm screwing this up. How can I fix it? And I remember having a conversation with my professor, and I said, I don't know if this is a little red or a little magenta. And he goes, well, how much red or magenta do you think it is? And I'm like, maybe just a point or two. He goes, a point or two. Really, a point? Because you can barely perceive, a point of color. He goes, what do your eyes tell you? I said, my eyes tell me it's pretty darn good, and I ought to just move on to the next negative. And he goes, well, why don't you do that? And that told me to kind of get out of my head and get out of the textbook and to trust my eyes.
Yeah.
And so from that point forward, I became a really good color printer as well.
Makes sense.
And I developed this reputation. They called me Mr. Pretty Colors. So in critiques and stuff, all the kids that had like muted color palettes to the work, Dale's was like bright.
Okay.
Primary, bright, because I'd studied the history of color photography.
Yeah.
And I loved Pete Turner's work, who was a very a busy New York advertising photographer.
All right.
Who his training came from the Navy. And if you can't go to photography school, the next best place to learn photography is the Navy. Because in the bottom, under the waterline of every aircraft carrier in the entire United States Navy, inside those aircraft carriers is a kick-ass darkroom.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And so I've known a lot of guys that have come out of the Navy that are excellent technicians. They're really good photographers, Pete Turner being one of them.
Okay.
He was a high color guy. I kind of emulated that look, and so I got to be known as the color guy.
Yeah.
And so I got to finish what I started, which was to be a fine art photographer. And then the most ironic thing of all, and this is how I got into the business full time, was my senior year, my last semester, we actually had a recruiter come on campus looking for 2 staff corporate photographer positions to fill. And this had come, I think it was like right after spring break. I'd been away for a while, and I hadn't been in the lab for a while. And I walk in one day, and there's a sign-up sheet for interviews. Yeah. And it was with Hughes Tool Company.
Okay.
Howard Hughes. Not the aircraft division, but the tool company. That if you know Howard Hughes' history, which you probably don't.
No.
He's associated with aeronautics.
Yes.
And then later on that became satellite technology. But all Hughes' money came from his father's invention of the rotary oil drill bit. Oh. And so it was the tool company in Houston that was recruiting for these 2 photographer positions. So I go in, and there's a clipboard for a sign-up sheet for interviews, and the thing had been filled up already from the bottom up. Nobody wanted that first interview.
Oh, funny.
I took it.
Chickens.
Yeah. I took it. And this is pre-internet, of course. I did a little research, and I found out who was going to be coming up to interview the students.
Yeah.
It was one of our clients at the audiovisual company that I work for.
Even better.
I already knew the dude.
Yeah.
So I went and got a haircut. I bought a tie. I got my incredible color slide portfolio and now my color print portfolio.
Yeah.
And I show up for this interview, and all these kids are like sitting around. It was literally like 15-minute segments, you know? So all these kids are sitting around on benches, nervously waiting their turn. And I walk in at the very last minute, and the Hughes tool guy was in one of the professor's offices with the door closed. The professor opens the door, says, "Dale, you're up." The guy from Hughes Tool looks at me and goes, "I know you." I said, "Right, we worked on XYZ project."
A bunch of projects.
He's like, "Oh, great to see you. Come on in again." And I look back at every kid sitting on those benches was like, "Son of a bitch." So my 15-minute interview went like an hour and a half.
Oh, my goodness. Those poor kids.
Screwed up everybody's
Those
schedule.
poor kids.
And long story short, I got the job.
Okay, good.
And so I was one of two kids graduating in 1982 that had a job,
With a job
waiting for him.
Yeah.
Which it was great because I had like $22 to my name by the time I graduated college. You know, I needed that job. You know?
Okay.
So there's the whole
off
arc.
to the races.
And so that was my first job out of college, working for Hughes Tool Company in Houston, Texas, and that lasted 3 months.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, then work us up to, just keep going along in this story. So,
the next job was the job that I'd wanted.
Okay.
And this is in 1982. Mm-hmm. It was, and the job was audiovisual technician, which I already had a business card that had those words on it, / computer artist.
Okay.
82. And I'm like, shit. These people got a computer and they're doing imaging with it. I want in on this.
Yeah.
Of course, the day before I got laid off at Hughes Tool Company, we had a big meeting about how there aren't any more promotions based on seniority. They're all based on experience. And the next day I got laid off because I was the last guy hired.
Okay. Yep.
I wasn't too thrilled with the corporate world anyway. So I take this job and it's barely pulling minimum wage.
Okay.
You know. But in one room, I got a 4-aux camera I know how to use. In another room, I got a Genegraphics 100B workstation.
Yeah. It's a gold mine right
It
there.
was a gold mine.
Yeah.
And I'd done well in college. And so as a young 20-something employee, I was what they call an asshole. I was confident.
Gotcha.
I had ideas, and I was constantly going to management saying, "Let's do this, let's do that." And they were like, "Why don't you go shut up?" You know, and to make me shut up, they put me on the night shift.
Okay.
Stupidest thing they could have done. So my job working at night was to come in. And so we had a big room with a computer in it. And this is mainframe IBM stuff. Software came from NASA.
Okay.
And the hardware came from General Electric and IBM. And so we had a room with a computer in it, and we had a room with a film recorder because everything was output to 35 millimeter film.
Okay.
The JPEG had not been invented at this point. There was no desktop, no Adobe Photoshop, none of that. And then we had this 4-aux animation film camera in the third room. So my job was to come in, and the first thing I did was to take the film, was to cut the long roll film that had been shot in the film recorder and take that and put it on the processor. And while the film was processing, I would run diagnostic programs on the computer, clean it all up and get it ready for the guys who came in the morning. All right, so then after the film was processed, it was my job to mount all, cut all the little mount all the slides, and bag everything up, for the clients. And then basically was like to schedule the guys' production for the next day. My employers thought that was an 8-hour job. Okay, E6 processing is like 40 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, running diagnostics on the computer was like automatic.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And this is everything was tractor feed printouts. Yeah. And I didn't know anything about computers. I'm just looking for certain lines of code that if they're wrong, I had to go in and like install a patch, or something, and everything was fine. Anyway, I could do my entire job in about 2 hours, leaving me 6 hours to do my own thing.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So they left me with access to a computer and a 4-aux camera. And so I started doing some of the very first ever photo digital hybrid imaging.
Okay.
So I'm mixing computer-generated elements with photographs. Nobody had done anything like this.
Okay.
And I'm not sleeping because during the day, I would go out and I'd look for freelance work.
Gotcha.
And so I'd go to work at 4 o'clock, work all night, get home, catch the end of the David Letterman show back when it came on after Johnny Carson.
Okay.
Sleep a couple hours, and then get up and then hit the pavement the next morning, and I would look for freelance work, and then I would go do my job at night.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I started developing freelance clients based on my style, and nobody had that. Even other people that did have access to the same kind of technology weren't thinking the way I was. And
that makes sense.
And so I was still a pretty introverted guy. I didn't really like the schmooze aspect of the marketing part of the business.
Yeah.
But I managed well enough. But what I really wanted to do is I wanted to get into stock photography. And stock photography came out of, the 50s and 60s and kind of came into its own in the 70s. And this is where you get hired as a freelance photographer to, say, shoot an annual report.
Yep.
All right, so you might do 10 different shoots in 10 different cities, in a factory, in an office,
Yes.
all kinds of different stuff. You might shoot 300 rolls of film.
Okay.
36 exposures times 300, do the math.
Yeah.
You overshoot. So you have an annual report that might have 20 or 30 pictures in it. What do you do with all the rest of this stuff? Well, there are agencies that would take the outtakes from an assignment shoot, and they would market that to people who needed a picture but could not afford a photographer to shoot it specifically for them.
Yes.
Good example is like a travel agent. Remember travel agents? You go into a travel agent's office, usually there's a picture of,
the Bahamas,
Bazinga.
French Polynesias, Greece.
Exactly. You don't, as much as I would like that job to go down there and take that picture of that couple walking underneath that palm tree, somebody else has shot that.
Yeah.
And a client can basically license that image for a much, much lower fee.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to do.
Okay.
I wanted to do my own thing. I didn't want to be bothered with clients, but I wanted to work commercially.
Makes sense.
And so I had this portfolio of photo digital hybrid work. And at the time, the big stock agency was the Image Bank.
Okay.
You may have even heard of them back in the day. Because stock photo agencies, they always managed to get the seller a photo credit, but not always the photographer.
Oh, yeah.
So you'd see a magazine, and it would say Photo Image Bank. It wouldn't say Photo Pete Turner / Image Bank.
Yep.
That was their marketing deal. So anyway, in order to get your work reviewed and under consideration with an agency, and these photographers beat a path to these guys' doors.
Of course.
Because it's easy passive income. You needed at least 200, 250 pictures, to show them that you had the depth.
Yeah.
And so I had befriended this old-time photographer in Houston who's one of the old guys who'd been around forever. And I'd visited his studio one day, and he had one of my slides.
Okay.
Or a duplicate of one of my slides sitting on a light table in his studio. And what it was a some kind of industrial machine that it was half machine, half drawing.
Okay.
Like a CAD CAM rendering.
Gotcha.
Because the thing hadn't been built. There'd been one prototype, and they were looking for funding to go into production with this thing, right? And so I got the job to photograph the prototype, but take half of it and turn it into, this kind of glowing green line drawing, and it was an amazing image. Took weeks. And here's this little old guy. He's got a copy of this thing on his light table in the studio. And I'm like, where'd you get that? And he goes, oh, a friend of mine gave me. He goes, how do you know that? I said, well, that's mine.
Yeah.
He goes, oh, you're the dude? You did this? Holy crap. And so I started explaining to him what I was doing, and I was looking for a stock photo agency. And this guy was represented by the Image Bank.
Okay.
And he goes, I'm going to give you the name of somebody at like the second biggest stock photo agency. Write a letter to this guy, send him this picture and a few others. I said, well, I'm supposed to have 200, 250. He goes, send the dude 4. Send him this picture and 3 others. Write him a letter, drop my name, and just put it in an envelope. Send him duplicates, no originals or anything. Just drop it in an envelope and just mail it off to this dude in New York. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm listening to all the old guys. So I do that, and I get a phone call from the guy, and I get a contract.
Okay.
4 pictures.
Oh.
4 photos. Not 200, not 250, 4. So I was their computer geek guy.
Okay.
And then I lost the job. Well, then I quit the job at the computer company. It was barely minimum wage, and they treated us terribly. And there was another computer artist that had left, and he got a teaching job. And I was like, ooh, teaching. I like that. And so he served to get me an introduction at the Art Institute of Houston.
Okay.
Private school, for-profit kind of college, not really a great art school, but a commercial art school. Okay. And so I get this job teaching photography over there.
Okay.
Well, I don't have access to any of this equipment anymore. And so a 4-ox camera, I looked around in the used market, used $15,000, $20,000. Okay. The computer I was working on was easily a $500,000 machine.
Yeah.
And there's only a few of those.
So
in the
many
country.
of those. Mm-hmm.
So on the way out the door at the computer company, of course, I'd saved everything, and the floppy disks were like 10 by 10 inches, and they held 288K.
Oh my goodness.
I spent a couple of nights imaging onto film everything that I had done. Yeah. So I walked out of there with hundreds of feet of film of like just raw images. Mm-hmm. And then I went home and I built my own optical printer. Okay. Yeah, I had a camera modified. I had a pen registration system. To basically, I did for $3,500 what a $15,000 4-ox camera would do with a few compromises. Yeah. So I built my own optical printer. So I started doing this similar kind of work, but it was all optically. But because I had computer-generated elements, the people that looked at it, they'd never seen computer graphics. Of course. And so they just assumed it was all computer. Mm-hmm. So my rates were higher. I was a unique fish in the pond. Yep. And so I taught for a couple of years and pursued stock photography. Okay. And at the same time, I pursued fine art photography. Okay. I never gave up on that. And I was working with infrared film in black and white at the same time. And so I was working on like 3 tracks. I had my teaching job, which was my steady income, which provided the health insurance, which is a 20-something you don't need. Boy, it'd be nice to have better insurance now. So I had that, and then I had my little optical printer where I was generating work that was going off to New York, and this stuff is getting published. I got an Omni magazine cover, Scientific American, all the big science and tech magazines were licensing my stuff. Okay. I was developing a really good portfolio of published pieces, and at the same time, I was working with infrared film and nude models, and I'm getting in small exhibitions in the galleries. Yep. All right, and so I'm pursuing all that and having a great time. Doing this. And so I taught for a couple of years. I got fired from that. Never look better than your boss. And that's one of those things arrogant little Dale didn't figure out about the corporate world.
That's the corporate world.
It's like never look better than your boss. Yeah. And so the last real job I had before I opened up my own studio was as a photographer's assistant. But it was unlike the studio photographer's assistant. I was the assistant to one of the top corporate and advertising photographers in Houston. Gotcha. And we traveled. Okay. All right. And so that was a whole new thing. Yeah. And I knew I was going to get sacked. I knew I'd gotten sideways with the powers that be at the college. Yep. And so I had a couple of months to where I was looking for a job. Yes. Right. And I'd actually gone to New York, and I'd met another one of my heroes, which was Pete Turner, whom I mentioned earlier. I visited Pete's studio. Pete offered me a job. Oh, wow. He was like, oh, man, you already know how to do what I do. Right. And I said, let me think about that. I went back home to Texas, and I got offered another job at a catalog photography company. And it paid well, but it was literally shooting the inserts inside of the newspaper, dog food and boxes of crackers and cereal.
Boring. Yeah.
So I turned that down, and I turned down Pete Turner because I knew how to do a Pete Turner picture.
Yeah.
What I was weak at was my people photography.
Okay.
I was introverted. I'm quiet. Right. And to this day, even though I've worked with fashion models and nude models and people in all walks of life, I'm not a people shooter.
Okay.
I can.
Yeah.
I prefer not.
Yes.
So there's this guy, Joe Bearman, who was known as two things. One, as a colossal a-hole.
All right.
He had that reputation.
Yeah.
That preceded, you'd hear the dude's name and you'd hear that word. But the other thing that he was very, very good at was people photography.
Okay.
And so I decided that I'll bite the bullet. I won't go to New York. I won't take the high-paying catalog photography job.
Yeah.
I'll carry this guy's camera bag, and I'm going to go to school on this guy.
Exactly.
To be a people shooter, very much the same way I went to school on Wilburn back in the studio days. And so I told myself that when I took the job that I would not work as a photographer's assistant longer than 1 year.
Okay. Drum roll, please.
I quit the job after 51 weeks.
Okay.
And I learned two things from carrying Joe's camera bag and setting up his lights and stuff. One was how to the psychology of people photography, because this guy could literally go from being a complete jerk to turning on the charm and getting great expressions.
Shots he needed.
And so I learned how he did that, and I also learned a whole lot of things on what not to do.
Okay.
Because he was the a-hole.
Yeah.
And so after 1 week short of a year, I felt confident in my people photography and in everything else.
Yep.
And I, at that point, screw it. This was 1986.
Okay.
So in the summer of 1986, I quit my last real job.
I
opened my first studio.
Mm-hmm.
I got married and I got divorced.
Okay.
All in
a big year.
All in a 6-month span.
Yeah.
Yeah. The deal that I'd had with my first wife, who I met at the college where I taught, she was a teacher. Mm-hmm. She was also a really, really great painter. So we had a deal, is that we're going to get my business going, and the months that I come up short with the cash, you'll kick in. Mm-hmm. After I get established, we will try to roll my clientele into your clientele.
Makes sense.
And so if it's not a photography job, you'll do the illustration job. The relationship went south really fast. And so within 6 months, I found myself with a studio, a new business, not very many clients, and no safety net.
Yeah.
Because she was the safety net and she was gone. And so everything got really, 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 really serious, in 1986. And, when everything you have, when every morsel of food that you eat, when, literally every penny you have to your name is the result of your ability to create a marketable picture, those pictures get real, real important. And so some of the fun went away.
Oh, it does.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I stuck with it.
Okay.
I worked out of my home. I didn't rent a big giant studio, and I primarily did location photography.
Okay.
So I really didn't need a studio.
Yep.
So between 86 and 94.
Whoa.
I worked in Houston, Texas, and I shot for the magazines.
Okay.
And, there was a lot of magazines at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I never shot for Texas Monthly. That was the biggie.
Oh,
Everybody wanted to shoot for the Yeah. I had a friend who sadly just passed away a couple months ago. was one of the first photographers to shoot for Texas Monthly and did some just brilliant work, And he was like, he was the guy at the top of the mountain that all of young pups were
looking at.
Yeah. Well, he went from mentor to target.
Yes.
We were. It's like when I'm a student,
shooting for that.
Yeah, I'm a student. I'm not a competitor. Now, I'm in the competitive.
I'm in
world.
the game.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to be careful. I think about peaking too young.
Mm-hmm.
I got a lot of good positive feedback in college. I graduated top of my class. I was the whiz kid. And then you get out into the marketplace and you get slapped down hard and you don't get an apology.
No.
Because it's dog eat
they
dog.
Just kick you again.
It's dog eat dog, cat eat mouse, mouse eat cheese, and you're the cheese.
Mm-hmm.
And so you work your way up. And so by 94, commercially, I had pretty much gotten out of the assignment business and was strictly working as a stock photographer.
Okay.
Doing optical work.
Yeah.
So at the time, my marriage, it crashed and burned very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I was dating the woman who is now my wife, and when I met her, she was the manager of the Houston Image Bank office.
Oh, go figure.
I was with a different agency, and so we were technically competitors. Mm-hmm. But she was also the girlfriend. But that job ran out, and she ended up at a photo lab as a head of sales.
Okay.
And so this was 1994, and she went to work at the office at the photo lab. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting at my home office. And it was like around tax time because I remember I was working on the taxes, and this is 1994. And let me back up just a second.
Yeah.
Back to the first wife. I did a road trip with her in 1986 when I came through Prescott the first time.
Oh,
all right.
Good to connect the dots.
Yeah. And we had driven up from Phoenix up Yarnell Hill, Highway 89, on our way to the Grand Canyon. We got to Prescott, and I'm like, "Wow, this is a neat little town. This is like an old West town. It's got a town square, a courthouse. I say, hey, let's come on, let's just gotta drive. She's one of those types. You know? So anyway, a year or so later, I got her out of my life, and I took a road trip to photograph landscapes, and I made sure that after I wrapped it up at Shiprock and Monument Valley and Canyon de Chelly that I came to Prescott.
Okay.
And I really liked the place. And at the time, I was thinking, well, I'm not doing a lot of assignment work, and everything is going, off to New York.
Mm-hmm.
So if I've got a phone, a fax, and FedEx, I can just about do business from anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the late 1980s and early 90s here in Prescott, of course we had phones, and if you've got a phone, a fax machine works.
Yes.
Federal Express was literally a desk at the airport. So I'm FedExing, completed assignments to clients and stuff, and I got to make sure I get myself over to the airport in time to make FedEx. It's not like it is today. It was that new.
Yep.
Okay, so fast forward, I had brought my new girlfriend, who is now my wife, to Prescott on another photo shoot. And she's a girl from Chicago. So camping and outdoors stuff, she was an urban chick.
Okay.
Very first time she goes camping, Monument Valley. That's how you impress a chick on a camping trip.
That's how you know.
You don't go to the state park in Illinois. You go to Monument frickin' Valley. And, of course, we come and we spend some time in Prescott. I'm like, well, what do you think of this place?
Yeah.
And she's like, well, this is really neat. So fast forward up to 1994. She's off at her photo lab job in sales. I'm at home working on the taxes. And I had everything up. And guess what? I had not done a local assignment in a year.
Okay.
Everything was for stock, and it's all going to New York. Okay, well, that tells me right there I don't need to be in the city anymore.
Right.
All right. And Texas is a tough place. I mean, I have no love for Texas. It's hot. It's humid. They got roaches the size of Buicks.
Yes.
They got mosquitoes the size of Apache helicopters. And the place, unfortunately, is crawling with Texans.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to live someplace to where there was 4 seasons.
Okay.
Where I could open the windows and have like non-air conditioned air to breathe, and that's kind of stuff. I wanted to live in the mountains. And I was at that point in life, now by then, it's like late 20s, early 30s.
Yep.
And I'm listening to people who are a generation older than me talking about, I'm going to retire in a couple of years and then I'm going to move to the place where I really want to live.
Right.
And I remember hearing that thinking, well, screw
You're
that.
crazy.
Screw
Why?
that.
Yeah.
Because, if you live your life for tomorrow, you don't know if you're going to get it tomorrow.
No.
You could get run over by a bus, tomorrow.
Yes.
You don't know. And I thought, sooner would be better than later.
Mm-hmm.
And so I come to this epiphany that I'd done no local work. And a little while later, my girlfriend comes home early from work. I'm like,
Yeah.
what are you doing here? And she goes, they asked me to do something really unethical at work today. I quit. Screw it. We're moving to Arizona. And after I picked my jaw up off the floor, I just looked at her and said, okay.
Yeah, here we go. Okay.
And literally within a day or so, she was in the car out here to Prescott.
Yeah.
I was back in teaching part-time
Okay.
at this point too. I was teaching night classes at a community college. And so she comes up to Prescott to look for a place to rent. And so she got like a week, and then it was our spring break.
Okay.
All right, so I got on a plane. I
Mm-hmm.
flew out here. I met her. We looked at some places. We ended up renting a place out in Dewey.
Okay.
Because in '94,
Yeah, go for it.
in '94, there'd been some kind of national magazine article that had come out about Prescott being one of the great places to live in America. And then suddenly, it's like the place is packed.
Yes.
So we ended up renting this duplex out in Dewey on the other side of Prescott Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And so she'd driven out, I'd flown out. And so we drive back to Texas together. And what did we do? I guess it was still spring break. I don't know. Anyway, I had a week off. So I hired a couple of kids from my night class, rented the biggest, Timothy McVeigh Ryder truck they had.
Oh, yeah.
And packed up, moved out here.
Oh, my goodness.
Left her here, and then
Yeah.
I went back and I finished
up.
the semester, living in an empty apartment.
Yep.
I think I spent some time with my folks, and they couldn't understand why I was going to leave Texas.
Yep.
Because all those moves that I was subjected to as a child.
Yeah.
Well, that was typical American life. The family follows the father's job.
Yes.
So he gets transferred from one city to the next, to the next, to the next.
Yes.
You go. I made a decision based on what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I never my folks knew that I was not really keen on Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And I really didn't want to live my life there. And Texas is a okay place to be from or to go home to.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a place that I want to live my life.
Yeah.
They just couldn't fathom that a person would make a decision based on nothing but that's what I want.
Right.
And I tried to explain to my dad. My father and I never really got along. He never really understood.
Mm-hmm. That's tough.
And again, he really hated the arts. He was one of those people that, never went to galleries, never went to museums,
Okay.
just hated it. I kept saying, I'm not happy. I'm not happy living here. I want to live there. And if I fail,
We'll move on.
I'll move someplace else.
Yep.
And so Texas in the rearview mirror is a beautiful sight. So '94 we land here in Prescott.
Wow.
And I basically continued doing the same thing for a year or so.
Okay.
And then we hit the fast lane of the digital revolution.
Okay.
In the early '90s.
Yeah.
All right. So I look at digital photography and digital art. I think digital art is going to be a thing in and of itself.
Absolutely.
Eventually. I think it will. If art history is a tree and painting is a branch, and drawing is a branch, and photography is a branch. Well, maybe digital art will be the branch that grows off the photography branch, but I think it's going to be a thing in and of itself. And what Photoshop allowed us to do, it was to break out of the photo lab limitations. All right. And so George Lucas said the same thing after he saw what Spielberg did with the first Jurassic Park movie.
Okay.
He was like, wow, this computer graphic stuff is now believable enough to where I can do those 3 prequel Star Wars movies.
Gotcha.
And do all the nifty stuff that we couldn't do optically in the 70s and 80s. And say what you want about the Star Wars prequels.
Right.
They're way better than what Disney did with the last 3.
Yep.
Even though the last 3 have a cooler look to them, you know, where the prequels do have a kind of a digital look to them. Lucas could not have done that any other way.
Right.
And so to me, I always liked surrealism. You know, the photographic process for me never ended with the click of the shutter. I would muck around with it in the dark room and do things that the camera couldn't do, but you can only do so many things. And then the computer comes along and basically you're Spider-Man, because with great power comes great responsibility, you know, and the ability to make really stupid, cool looking pictures.
Absolutely.
You know, and a lot of garbage came out of the first days of.
That's how it works.
Yeah, that's exactly how it works. So I look at the end of the classical surrealist period as 1989.
Okay.
That's the year Salvador Dali died.
All right.
Adobe Photoshop 1.0 hit the market in 1990. And I think that is the beginning of the
line of demarcation,
surrealist era.
If you will. Okay.
And so I started working. So one of the reasons I left the computer graphics company and I took the teaching job was that I could see over the horizon that everything we were doing on this giant, you know, $500,000 mainframe was going to go desktop.
Right.
And I kept going to my employers, you know, saying, you know, we've got to do illustration. We've got to do higher end work. You know, we can't keep doing these bar charts and pie charts and titles and stuff. I said, this is all going to go desktop and we're going to be out of business.
Yep.
And they were like, get out. You know.
It's like nowadays, or just a few years ago, when people were working for the taxi cab company going, I don't see how that, like, Uber is going to be a thing. They didn't know the word Uber, but like, you could just kind of forecast, like, this is the technology is changing.
But Uber and Lyft, I'm sorry, but they go against everything our parents taught us about not getting into cars with strangers.
Now that's true.
You know, at least the taxi drivers got the medallion.
Oh,
you know, where
their stamp of approval.
Yeah, you know, and so if you leave your purse in the back of the taxi cab, you can probably call the company and get it back the next day.
That's
you
funny.
ain't gonna get your purse back if you forget it in the back of some guy's Uber car. You know, he's got your money. You know, and so, but yes, in terms of the business model,
it's shifting, it's pivoting. Mm-hmm.
And you know, and so they eventually became a dinosaur and became extinct and went out of business.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that so nowadays we don't do slideshows. What do?
PowerPoint.
Okay. All of the graphics in PowerPoint came from the Genegraphics computer system that I was working on in the 1980s.
Shouldn't surprise us. By
the time Microsoft had come along and they were developing Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. You know, the 3, you know, word processing, you know, the suite of, you know, business applications. They needed like, you know, plug-in standard starting point slides.
Yes.
So what was left of the Genegraphics Corporation and their computers was sold to Microsoft. So it still lives on in one way or another.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, the whole thing went desktop. And so I started working with Photoshop 1.0.
Okay.
Although I could not afford a computer until Photoshop 3.0. Photoshop 1.0 comes out, and so now the photo labs, they're starting to fall. Because everything is very, very quickly moving digital.
Rapidly.
The darkroom's going away, and the digital camera was still a piece of garbage. But
I bet.
But it was coming.
Yes.
And so a lot of the photo labs went out of business, and the ones that lasted are the ones that adapted and adopted the new technologies and rode that wave, and probably lost a lot of money as they wound down their chemical labs and wound up their digital labs.
Yep.
And so at this point, I was renting time on computer systems in labs and graphic design houses because they had the money to buy the systems, but they didn't have the personnel that could operate them that well. Or they were doing just typesetting. Mm-hmm. There was a period in the early days of Adobe that when the graphic designers got a hold of Illustrator, you would get brochures that had like 50 different fonts, used, in the typography. It was terrible. It was terrible graphic design.
Yeah.
But look what we can do.
Of course.
You didn't have to have a typesetter, or any of that kind of stuff, And so these guys are just going nuts with this stuff. Mm-hmm. I got a scholarship and went to the Santa Fe photographic workshops.
Okay.
And learned Photoshop 1.0 on a Mac.
All right.
But it took me a few more years until I had the bucks to really get the kind of computer I needed to run it well.
Yeah.
Plus, it's not just getting a computer and the application. At this point, you needed a digitizing tablet, you needed a film scanner, you need a whole lot of peripherals.
Yeah.
And the money adds up really fast. Mm-hmm. And at the beginning of the era, it's like every other week there's an upgrade.
Changing.
There's something newer and better, faster comes along. I mean, even now.
It's in some...
Cameras are ridiculous.
Ridiculous.
It used to be if I wanted to take an infrared picture, I put an infrared film in my camera.
Yeah.
Now I got to have a whole different camera.
I do really like the saying the best camera is the one you use.
Generally it's this one.
Because you use it all the time. So
yeah. I'm teaching a couple of online photo classes.
Oh, good.
I have one student, he's a retired doctor, and everything's with the cell phone.
Yeah.
He's a sports guy, bicyclist. He's got the cell phone with him.
That's it.
And so we've been doing
so many people.
iPhoneography.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing.
Yeah.
What can be done with this. But
I want you to condense kind of this time when you shifted from the dark room to the digital age, and then bring us up to just kind of where your current passions are as an artist.
So I think it was 96, 97. We moved from Dewey and we bought a house in Prescott.
Okay.
And the house had an unfinished basement. And I'm like, okay.
Jackpot.
I'm like, this is my studio.
Yes.
So literally the day after we closed on the house, I had the contractor out and we're measuring for my studio office and darkroom. And so my studio is in my home.
Okay.
Obviously, I don't photograph cars. It's not a huge studio, but I can do tabletop stuff. And now I do a lot of stuff against a green screen.
Makes sense.
All right. Because we're going to cut that out and it's going to be composited with something else.
Yeah.
I've got an office. I got a place for my computer workstation. And you'll like this when I get to it. And I built the dark room of my dreams. And I used it for less than 10 years before it became a storage space for digital supplies. But in my dark room, I had 3 enlargers. I had a 5-foot sink. I had a slide duplicator. I had an optical printer. I had a dry mount press. Yeah. I had each enlarger. I had a cold light in one enlarger, which is a special kind of light source. I had everything. They all had identical timers. Everything was on a foot switch. It was
darkroom people would have been envious.
It would. Ansel's wet dream. It was that. It's a great dark, and it was clean, and it didn't stink. And it didn't share space with a motorcycle or a car, or it wasn't or a toilet, or a hot water heater. It was a dedicated dark room. It had a legitimate switch on the wall for the safe light.
Yep.
It was a really nice dark room, and sadly, that went away. Again, if somebody wants to throw a lot of money at me, I will source what I can find in the chemical world and make them that print. But they're going to have to throw big bucks at me.
Yeah, it costs a lot.
So we moved into the house, and by this point, I'm digital.
Okay.
Well, no, we built the darkroom. I used it as long as it was feasible.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And there was a period there to where you could it's like, what's the best way to do this? The old way or the new way? Well, the new way is kind of wonky because the equipment doesn't always work right. We'll do it the old way. And then after a while, you'd say, well, do I want to do the old way? New. And then suddenly all that old stuff got shoved in the corner and, everything is digital.
Yeah.
And so I had all kinds of computers built, over the years, RAM.
Of course.
And photographers are terrible. Okay, photographers are hardware geeks, and they have been since the day photography was invented. And what is a computer? It's the ultimate gadget.
Oh, it is.
And so photographers. So the guy you would have a conversation with about Nikon versus Canon. Now you're having a debate on Mac versus PC.
Yep.
And it's like, I just so don't care. I so don't care.
Me neither.
So my system today is I'm not running any new software.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to probably do it. I'm 62 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I got fewer days ahead and more days behind, and so I'm not really keen on upgrading if what I have works for me, and it does.
Yep.
Now, eventually, I'm going to get to the point to where I won't be able to do something.
Of course.
And then
the limitations of software, hardware, whatever.
Yeah, and people who don't know, I heard a debate about this years ago about built-in obsolescence. Why you have to buy a new car every year, and they were trying to apply that to computer technology. Okay. I said, no, Moore's law is for real. We are really doubling our processing speed, literally like every 9 months.
It's fast.
It is getting better. Yeah. All the time, and it continues to get better.
Yeah.
And I feel very fortunate to have lived during this particular time period because I got to do pure analog photography, and at the end of the analog era, there will never be film better than what I used in the 80s and 90s because all research and development film has stopped, and that is all going into software and hardware now. So I used the best films that were ever and will ever be made.
Yep.
I had the best equipment, and I had the knowledge of 100+ years of photographic history.
Yeah.
And then suddenly we changed from chemical engineering to electrical engineering, and now it's all new. Yeah. But what it provided for me was a shorter conduit between idea and execution. I was no longer bound by the photographic process.
Right.
And so the first thing I did is I got heavily into surrealism.
Okay.
Because I could. I didn't need scissors and glue. I could literally, I had the virtual version of that. Mm-hmm. And so I did, 3 or 4 books of very surreal imagery.
Okay.
A lot of it based on the landscape. I continued working with the figure for a while. My very first book published, which was back in '97, was composite prints done in the darkroom combining the nude figure and the landscape.
Okay.
So imagine, a woman's form fading into a sand dune,
yep.
That type of imagery. But I never really got famous. I'm not really, I'm not a known person. And while that's a double-edged sword, the cool edge of that is that I'm not limited.
Right.
The galleries don't think of me as a surrealist. They don't think of me at all. Mm-hmm. All right. And so we'll talk about this, but this is very impressionistic.
Okay.
So I get to explore my ideas about impressionism, surrealism. I've worked in abstract expressionism. I've worked as a night photographer, an astrophotographer. I feel very fortunate to have lived in Prescott during 3 now bright comets, Yakutaki 2, Hale-Bopp, and then Neowise.
All right.
Last year. I would have never seen that if I lived in the big city where there's a lot of light pollution. Here I can walk out in my backyard and there's a bright comet in the sky.
Yeah.
So night and digital cameras are wonderful for night photography. Can do worlds better work than we could ever do with film. I've done street photography. I've done portraits. I've done maternity photography. I've done pretty much everything you can do, except I don't do food unless I've got a really good stylist. And there's none of that to do around here anyway. And I don't do weddings, although I've done 2 for friends. And I don't do cars in the studio.
Okay.
All right? Because there's guys in Detroit that literally have airplane hangar-sized studios. And so they can have all that.
Yeah, right.
You know, if you want to go out by the Granadales and park your Miata, I'll take a picture of it.
Yeah, much different.
But so those are the 3 things I do. But everything else to me is like wide open. And
I love it.
well, like maternity photography. I'd worked with a woman who had been a model. And we got on really well. It was a very interesting working relationship in that she knew how to move, and took direction very well. And we really did worked as a good team.
Yes.
And then she gets pregnant and calls me up and says, I was thinking about that. I said, you want me to photograph your maternity? And she's like, yeah. And I said, okay, here, I will do it. And I'll do it for free as a friend, because I'd never done maternity photography before, and it was something new. And we shot every week or every other week.
That's wonderful.
You know, all throughout.
Yes.
Now I did learn a number of things. Don't ask a heavily pregnant woman to get up at sunrise.
Okay.
That doesn't work. But we did some, and I told her, I said, I don't want to do these like glamour kind of maternity pictures that we see in the magazines. I want to do something weird and different and stuff. And so since we had a working relationship prior to that, she trusted me.
She understood.
Yeah, and so we had some
great.
really interesting work, and that was a thing that it kind of came along. I got an opportunity to do it. You know, I did it. If it comes along again, I'd love to do it.
That's great.
You know, night photography is another thing. I mean, with the digital camera, the electronic sensor is so different in low light than the way film responded. So I was reading a magazine article, you know, about this. I'd seen some really amazing pictures, and I read this article, and they're talking about the kind of cameras that they're using, and I'm like, well, I have that camera.
Yeah,
I can do that. So I went out in my yard. I took a picture, and I did like a 30-second exposure. And I got this beautiful picture from my house of the Milky Way.
It's incredible.
It was amazing.
That is incredible.
It was amazing. Then, and this was a test shot.
Right.
You know. And then I brought it in. I took it into Photoshop, and I dropped a UFO in the sky. And the next thing you know, it's on the History Channel. Yeah. Of course, I gave it to the stock agency. Yep. You know, and so I've been able to explore a lot of things.
That is the best.
And one of the weird things is I got involved in phenomenological illustration.
Okay.
When we went digital, I thought, I'm going to reinvent myself, and I want to be that science fiction illustrator.
Yeah.
You know, that I always wanted to be, that I couldn't be because, you know, of photographic limitations. And I found that was kind of a closed society. But I snuck in the back door because I got a client that needed an illustration for a book about UFOs.
Okay.
So I did the UFO book cover.
Yeah.
So I started doing more and more of this, and then I picked up the International UFO Congress, which they used to meet in Laughlin every year.
All right.
I picked them up as a client, and so I did all their posters and their DVD packaging and all that. And then I started getting calls from tabloids.
Okay.
And a lot of these were European, a lot in Japan. And so after a while, I developed this bizarre niche where I was like, for 8 or 10 years there, I was like the go-to guy if you needed an alien, a UFO, a Bigfoot, a Loch Ness Monster, a Chupacabra, you know, just weird stuff, you know, because I've got all this stuff. Yeah. And I've got a computer. Yep. And to this day, I get 1 or 2, at least, sometimes more, calls or emails from people who have gotten, and it's generally a fake picture of Bigfoot. Okay. Got a call from, so Hulu a couple months ago did a special about Bigfoot. Okay. You know, documentary thing. I get a call from a writer with the New York Post. Mm-hmm. Right, that's the tabloid. That's the Murdoch one, not the New York Times. So I get a call from this writer at the New York Post. And she goes, I've got this photo. It's attributed to you. And she goes, and I'm just tracing the provenance of this thing.
Yeah.
And I want to know, is it real or whatever? And she goes, give me your email address and I'll email you the picture as reference. So on the phone, it's one of my fake Bigfoot pictures. And I'm like, okay, I got your email. I said, yeah, for one, that is my image.
Yes.
And she goes, okay, please tell me this is real. And I said, that is a real photograph of a fake Bigfoot. She's like, damn, I knew it.
Oh my God.
It's I get calls from filmmakers and Bigfoot investigators in England and stuff, because I give all this stuff to the stock photo agencies, and I'm like one of the few guys who's not doing like cartoony stuff.
Okay.
You can go the cartoony route,
hilarious?
but I distress, if anybody has a really clear picture of Bigfoot, we're immediately going to say, well, it's a fake.
Yeah.
It's too good. But if it's distressed, it's a little out of focus, it's a little tilted, out of whack.
Then you question.
And so if you turn on the History Channel and turn on Ancient Aliens or any of those Bigfoot shows or the monster shows, you're looking at my stuff.
That is...
They license my stuff.
It's why I love this long-form content, is because these things come out that you don't just walk up and start a conversation and learn these little quirks about people.
It's like, you're the Bigfoot guy.
It's the best. You're the Bigfoot guy. I'm now going to refer to people. Yeah, I did a podcast with the Bigfoot guy. Don't worry. It won't make sense to you. I just love it.
Well, it was fun. It's an interesting visual problem to solve.
And then it becomes a niche, and it just right. Why not?
Yeah, exactly.
You're having fun. Yeah. You're making a living.
Better than shooting weddings.
Exactly. Yeah.
Weddings are horrible because you got the double mother-in-law factor to deal with.
Yeah.
It
wouldn't be my cup of tea.
The worst I get is people that once you put anything online, eventually you will lose control of it. It's going to get nabbed, And so I don't worry about watermarks and all of that. I put the metadata in. It usually gets stripped off by the first time somebody copies it.
Yeah.
But I never put anything out there that's high enough resolution to make a nice print from anyway. Mm-hmm. You can make a little print, but you're not going to make...
Which no one's going to do.
No one's going to do. Yeah. But people get a whole... It's the Bigfoot phenomenon. There seems to be this Bigfoot community out there.
Oh, yeah.
Where I had a guy contact me about a Bigfoot photo that he had acquired. And when I told him it was mine, and I'm literally looking at the model sitting on the shelf in the studio, then he argued with me. He was invested in that image being real that he's got the guy who created it on the phone, and he's calling me a liar.
Bless his heart. Bless his heart. Yeah. I want to put a bow on all this because I love interviewing people, and this isn't so much an interview as just hearing people's stories of connecting the dots. So this 8 or 10 year run toward the end of your career with Bigfoot and the science and the UFO, it all makes sense when you hear everything.
Yeah, if you go back to the NASA influence in my early days.
Start where were you born and raised, and these things start to come out. We start to connect the dots, and all of a sudden, I've got the Bigfoot guy sitting at my table, and everyone who listens goes, "Oh yeah, well, that makes sense."
I love this stuff.
Yeah,
I love it. There's no such thing, more than likely, and the thing that'll make the difference in the history of photography and phenomena type images, ghosts and Bigfoot and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be the cell phone camera,
right?
Because now you've literally billions of people are walking the face of the earth, and they've got a 20-something megapixel still camera plus broadcast quality video.
Yes,
but what are we not seeing? We're not seeing UFOs. We're not seeing a good picture of a space alien. We're not seeing a sharp picture of Bigfoot. What are we seeing? We're seeing cops beating up people that they've been beating up for the last 300 years.
Yeah.
There was a photographer who shot for Life magazine,
Okay.
when Life was the big picture tabloid. He was the first African-American man to shoot for Life magazine.
Okay.
This is in the 40s. His name was Gordon Parks. His bump on the timeline of photographic history is secure.
Okay.
With what he did. But when he got his first camera and began photographing the people he lived with,
Yeah.
who literally would walk down the street and if they saw a cop, would cross the street because they knew that being an African American in America in the 40s or 50s, that cop is going to find a reason to hassle you based on nothing more than your skin color. And Gordon Parks is the one who famously said, the camera can be a weapon to facilitate social change. That is what's going to happen with this camera.
We've already started to see it.
It started with the era of citizen journalism, and it was pre-cell phone, but it was the Rodney King beating.
Okay.
You got a guy with a high-8 portable camera photographing this. He still needed CNN or a news outlet to get his imagery out there. Today, you can download a free app from the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, that will, if you see something going on, you see George Floyd being murdered, and you video that, and you use the ACLU app, it'll instantly upload to the state ACLU server. Yeah. And that means if Officer Obie comes over and wants to suppress some evidence by nabbing your cell phone, the video is already out there. Yeah. These guys have been lying about this for 300 years.
Oh, yeah.
Most people don't know that the policing in general is an outgrowth of the Night Watch. And the Night Watch was to track down escaped slaves. And the mindset amongst a lot of these guys hasn't changed in 300 years.
Makes sense.
And so I think before we see any great Bigfoot photo, we're going to see social change. Because people who have been doing bad things and getting away with it for centuries are going to get busted because now we finally have photographic evidence. Yeah. And the young woman who photographed, I want to use the term filmed or videotape, but that's not really, but used her cell phone to record George Floyd's murder was awarded an honorary Pulitzer Prize for what she did. So this is really, really important stuff. I mean, we laugh about it, and and all the Bigfoot and alien stuff is it's harmless silliness that we can perpetrate using a telephone. But at the same time, this is a very important a technological advance that, if we use it properly, can make society in and of itself better.
Absolutely.
And so
none of these things are new. We just didn't know as much about them. They weren't as front and center as they are now. Because
a picture truly is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
A tweet ain't worth nothing.
We're not going to go down that tangent.
But amongst the fun stuff I do, I mean, I do serious work too. And if you want to talk about this for a sec.
Let's make it a sec and then let's transition.
Okay.
Yep.
Transition to where?
To why you live here.
To why I live here.
Yes.
Well, I live here because it's nice.
It's so cliche. Everyone says it.
Well, this stuff is here. So I'd worked as a surrealist for years and years and years. And I kind of got to a point where I really wanted to get back to my photographic roots. In other words, I didn't want to spend a day or a week working on one picture.
Okay.
I wanted to take a picture and be done. And a lot of the surrealist work that I did was based on the landscape. And while I was out in the landscape, I saw Native American rock used in a surreal composite based on the landscape. I would see this rock art. And I still do work in that vein, but I really wanted to get back to more pure photography. Yeah. So I was thinking about what I wanted to do as my next project, and I decided I wanted to document the rock art where I live.
Okay.
Here in the Southwest. And that's not a new thing. There's lots of books on this out there. And so I thought about a lot of ways to go about doing this. I thought about shooting it on Polaroid. Okay. So each print was a one of a kind. And then I thought, I don't want to do that. And then I thought, I'm going to go full retro. I'm going to use the darkroom. I'm going to go out and buy some black and white film. I'm going to shoot this in black and white. And really, the only people who care about how photographs are made are other photographers.
Absolutely.
And they're not my market.
It's like a videographer.
Exactly. And so I thought, I'm just going to shoot digital.
Okay.
It's more economical. I mean, I remember doing shoots to where, I got back to the studio after being on the road for 2 weeks, and I'm looking at a $2,000 lab bill, to have everything processed. You don't have that with digital.
Nope.
Plus, it gave me an opportunity to do more steps. And this is a 3-step process that I finally have come upon. I knew when I did the first shoot that I was going to find rock art that had been either decayed over time or had been vandalized.
Okay.
And so and there's a lot of good anthropology and archaeology books. And so one of the first places I went was to this place. And this is a pictograph. All right, there's two kinds of rock art. There's petroglyphs, which are chipped into the rock.
Okay.
And there's pictographs, which are painted or dyed.
Okay.
And the pictures I have today are the pictographs.
All right.
These are the guys who literally invented paint and paintbrushes to create this.
Okay.
So this is a place in Utah. It's called 9 Mile Canyon. And this particular deer pictograph is in a place called Rasmussen Cave. It's not a hidden site. But it had been on private property for years and years and years.
Okay.
And I guess the rancher who owned the property got tired of people coming on, and he defaced it by misspelling the word trespassing and painting it directly over this beautiful 1,500-year-old pictograph. Now, this happened sometime after 1930. Okay. I've seen early photos of this, and the no trespassing private property stenciling is not on it. Sometime after 1930 or 31, the guy did this. I don't know when it was done. I got guys online with, Facebook degrees arguing with me about dates and times. All I can say is that after 1930.
Yeah.
And so I knew about this because this was in the books. It'd been documented in its defaced form.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, I'm going to go there. I'm going to photograph it first because it's a known thing, and I'll see if my retouching chops are good enough. And I will use that as my proof of concept to see if my retouching abilities are good enough to bring this back to what I hope it looked like when the Native American artist created it.
Gotcha.
And I think I succeeded in the second image because the words are gone and you can't tell where they were. And I brought the color back up just a little bit because it had faded over time. And now if something is missing, if a piece of sandstone sheared off of the cliff, I can't replace what it took with it.
Right.
Because then that I'm in the realm of speculation.
Absolutely.
So I'm looking at it as kind of as a partnership or a client. And my client is the original artist. Yeah. And his art got defaced, and I'm fixing it for the guy. And so if whoever you are, all those years ago, approves of what I did, then I've been successful at it.
Absolutely.
But of course, as an artist, I want to make this my own.
Yeah.
And so I developed this third step, taking it, using a Photoshop plug-in filter to create this kind of impressionistic effect with it. And it's a process that I'd used on some other photos of a different subject matter that I thought would apply to this. And this is not just a click and apply deal.
Oh, right.
Okay. Most people who don't understand digital imaging think that, you're taking a photograph,
Boom,
Photoshop,
1, 2, 3 buttons.
No. Yeah. This is a filter from the Topaz suite, which is a plugin that runs inside of Photoshop.
Okay.
And it's called this particular filter is called Glow. And within the Glow suite, there's about 50 presets. And each preset has about 50 parameters that can be adjusted. And so, have you heard of a famous synthesizer player by the name of Rick Wakeman?
No.
Have you heard of the band Yes?
I think so.
Yes. Roundabout, Fragile. Oh, dude, you got to brush up on your 70s prog rock.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Rick Wakeman, he came from the 1970s progressive rock era.
Okay.
Like Keith Emerson and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Tony Banks out of Genesis.
Okay.
And he was a Moog player. He played the original analog Moog synthesizer.
All right.
Still writes and creates incredible music to this day. He's in his 70s now. But I read a really interesting interview with him, which he was talking about synthesizers, but everything he said relates directly to what we do in digital imaging. And he was, this was like in Keyboard magazine. He was he was basically addressing a kid who goes to the music store and he buys a synthesizer. All right? So kid brings it home. He's going to be Devo, Flock of Seagulls, whoever. Rick Wakeman says, I don't use any presets, and all the presets I use, I have edited.
Okay.
That means that he's taken the sound, you push the button that says flute, and he's modified that sound.
Okay.
He's made it his own. And that's what I'm doing in Photoshop.
Gotcha.
So I go in and I run this effect on a preset, using a preset. And then I go in and I start adjusting the parameters of that, and I create my own filter. Now, I've gone from photography to basically signal processing at this point. I'm just taking the data of the image and I'm outputting it in a different way using the Topaz Glow software. Okay. But it's not even that. I'll do that, and then I take it back into Photoshop, and I do some things you're not supposed to do.
Oh, bad.
Oh, yeah. It's like, oh, you're supposed to slide it this far. It's like, well, I'll go way over here with the thing, And I'll tweak it some more. Sometimes I'll take it back into Topaz. I'll run that filter again and then bring it back into Photoshop and then fade that back.
Yeah.
And so I've got my own system, but it took me 8-10 hours to create the click of the mouse that it takes to get to this.
Yeah.
I did the same thing over here. This is a place, it's a very famous pictograph panel that's actually 130 feet wide. It's called the Buckhorn Wash. It's in the San Rafael Swell area of Utah. And the top picture is how the pictograph looks today.
Okay.
Now you see it's been defaced.
Yes.
There's initials and dates, and you can also see over on the bottom right is where some old defacement has been repaired.
Oh, okay.
And repairing never works.
Yeah.
And so what I did with the center picture is I took out and cleaned up all of the recent vandalism, and I fixed the bad repairs. I think this is what the original artist left behind for us. And then, of course, the third step is bringing it into Topaz and applying this effect to it. Yeah. So I have a document of how it is in nature. I have a new image trying to bring it back to the way it was left when it was first created. And the last image, I've brought it into the 21st century using modern technology. So the person can see it out of context in an art gallery, and it will work as a one image by itself out of context.
Yeah.
I've been working on this for way too long. I started on this in 2016. Okay. The first photo shoot I did was up in Bears Ears National Monument.
All right.
I went to a place I'd been before. It's easy access. It's literally in a picnic area.
Okay.
Had a nice leisurely shoot. I wrapped it up. I thought, I'm just going to have my lunch here before I head up the road to the next site.
Yeah.
I go to the bathroom and I see a sign taped to the bathroom door. Help us protect Bears Ears National Monument. This was 2017.
Okay.
I saw this. Trump had just been elected. And Trump was issuing all kinds of executive orders to shrink national parks and monuments and open them up to fossil fuel exploration and mining, specifically uranium mining.
Okay.
And this was done in a completely capricious nature, in that none of the usual rules were followed. If you're going to change or create a national park or monument, you've got to have experts
from laborious process.
Yes, you've
for
got
obvious reasons.
Yeah, well, there's air, fish and game, water. There's all these departments. Plus, you've got the Indians who we stole the land from in the first place. Yeah. We really ought to talk to them. I'm really glad that we have a Native American in the Interior Department today, because I think that is a job best suited for someone who has a history that goes all the way back to North America.
Yep.
And not Western Europe. And so I'm shocked because not only do I have to worry about boneheads that are vandalizing, and they shoot bullets at this stuff, they hit it with spray paint.
Exactly.
They're idiots. They're idiots, and there's no reason to destroy this. But now, the United States government, who is tasked to protect these lands, is the very people who are putting them at risk again. And so there was kind of a sense of urgency at that point to visit more sites and to photograph more. And again, there's a lot of photographs of this in existence, but I'm doing something a little bit different in that I'm at least retouching them and bringing them back to the way they were back then. And so I started a GoFundMe campaign to raise money to fund my travel. Because even traveling,
so you can make it around to more.
Yes, and I didn't reach my goal, but I raised enough money to fund a few photo shoots and get me to some places that I wouldn't have been otherwise.
Great.
And so I've been working on this gradually, and I've been to, 40 or 50 sites. I'm going to Moab in a couple of weeks.
Wonderful.
To pick up a few shots I didn't get last time I was in that area. And then I've got one more site that I've got to have a Hopi guide to get to. And COVID has screwed that up. And so I'm going to wrap this up.
Wonderful.
Hopefully after the first of the year. I knew that I wanted to exhibit this work when I first started creating it. And so I made a proposal to a number of different galleries. But this is not the kind of stuff you put up in a restaurant or an alternative space. I really needed the right venue for this because there's an educational opportunity that comes along with this. And so I made a proposal to Yavapai College, to their art gallery, and lo and behold, they accepted my proposal.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. I rarely have that kind of luck. And so I made the proposal in 2018. They approved it in 19, and they offered me a solo show, full gallery, and that's a big gallery, for 2021.
All right.
And from the perspective of 2019, that was pretty far in the future, but things are scheduled that far out, and so you say yes if you want to do the thing. I said yes, but just so you know, before I did fine art photography, I was a commercial photographer, so I understand deadlines, and I'm proactive. And I said, and right now, and this was in 2019, I got 80 frame prints ready to hang, sitting on the floor of my studio. I said, so if you get somebody who can't mount their show in 2020, call me first. I literally can be there within hours. And I'll be darned if I got a call and I got it scheduled for July of 2020.
Okay.
And then COVID came along and screwed up everything. So the 2020 exhibition was put on hold. I was offered a virtual exhibition. And my philosophy on that is anybody can put up a website. And a virtual exhibition, which a lot of galleries have gone to that model because of COVID, it's just a JPEG. All right, you're only seeing the information. And I'd gone to a lot of time and trouble and expense using very unique, one-of-a-kind, interesting frames and different kind of presentation, not just a standard academic kind of show, everything in a black metal frame. And so I needed more than just the information of the image to be seen. I needed the whole artifact itself in the frame and in the environment where the image would be seen. And so I turned them down and I said, I can be patient. I will wait. And fortunately, the curator understood my point of view. And she said, okay, it's going to be 2020, at least, or it might be 2021. So now I'm back to where we originally were, but we're waiting out COVID.
Exactly.
And so in the meantime, the curator at the gallery leaves, and we get a new curator. I'm like, oh, God. New person. I got to start over. Fortunately, she had been the assistant of the previous curator.
Okay.
So she was already
in the loop.
She was in the loop.
Great.
Yeah. And so I was always generous every time. And I, I'm not bugging these people. I'm not like in their face. I mean, this is still way off in the future. But I always made the offer if you want to do a studio visit and come by, I'm more than happy to host you at the studio and show you what I'm doing. And she took me up on the offer. And so I'm like, so I turned my studio into a little mini gallery, and I'm looking out the window. It's like, who's coming over here? And I see a woman get out of a car, and she's like my age, and I'm like, oh God. Because I figured it's going to be some 20-something-year-old who just fresh out of a master's program with some BS thing that they got approved, to the art world. And I got somebody who was older and experienced. And when she got into the studio and saw what I had done, totally got it.
Great.
She's like,
that's what it takes often.
You have to see the real thing. So we are now scheduled for July of 2022.
Okay.
Next year. So,
just under a year from now.
Yeah, just under a year from now. I no longer have 80 frame prints in the studio. I have about 120.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so, and I'm still, in COVID, it did do two things. Well, it did a number of things, actually. I had to cancel every location shoot because I couldn't do any overnight shoots because staying at hotels and dealing with restaurants was just too iffy. So I continued matting, framing, and printing and preparing and cataloging. Also, I did some more research, and I did 5 location shoots in 2020 during COVID, but they were all within 100 or so miles of my home, so I didn't have to spend the night anyplace. So I ended up going out to Homolovi, out to Winslow, out to Lyman Lake, to a couple of sites in Maricopa County. And I discovered that right here in Prescott, in the Prescott Lake subdivision, there are a number of what are called little pocket parks. So when the builders were building that subdivision, they discovered petroglyphs, because this was all Indian land before the gringos moved in. Right? And so they discovered petroglyphs, and what they did is they preserved them.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and they collected them, and they put them all in these little areas along hiking trails and biking trails and stuff.
Interesting.
And so I got a map, and I found 7 locations. And so I got to photograph my topic right here, literally within a mile and a half of my home.
My backyard.
Yeah, well, in photographers, they never think of the backyard because they think that everything cool is someplace else.
Absolutely.
But if you really pay attention, there's stuff right here in your own backyard.
Yeah.
So that enabled me to do that. And so we're going to have a number of pieces in the exhibition. We're going to have a series of impressionistic like third step pieces, and then there's going to be a number of educational panels, kind of like these two, showing how it is, how it was, and how it is modernized. And so it's going to be a very cool exhibition. We're probably going to do a talk or a lecture along with it. So it gives me that educational opportunity.
People can connect the dots.
And people, they enjoy the Native American history. And then, of course, there's the ancient alien aspect of the whole thing, and I'll have to touch on that, too.
You have to.
Because there's some weird-looking stuff out there, but, let's give the Indians credit, and not defer to the aliens, It's just because you can't figure out how it was done doesn't mean that they had extraterrestrial help. You just probably had a smart guy in the old days that figured that out. So, but we're going to touch a bit on that and everything, and kind of cover the whole gamut, but not from the point of view of an archaeologist or an anthropologist. There's all the time periods and different tribes made these. The archaeologists, nobody really agrees on the meaning of this stuff. That's been lost to time.
That's a tough one.
And archaeologists, they won't tell you where these places are. I'm working on visiting a site in a couple of weeks to where it's a very unusual site. Not a lot of people know about it. And this guy had photographed it and was in a book. And I actually emailed the author of the book, who is an archaeologist.
Tell me more.
And he wouldn't even return. He wouldn't even reply.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, okay, this is typical. There's been a number of times, and all that does, it's like Dad cutting me off in college.
Fuels the fire.
It just makes me more motivated to do the navigational detective work that it takes. And so anyway, this boulder, this one particular boulder that I'm looking for, I've nailed it down to an 18-mile area.
Okay.
And I'm going to try to twist the arms of whomever is working in the local BLM, Bureau of Land Management office, to tell me where it is, because I've got the credibility.
Right.
I've got the body of work.
That's it.
And I'm going to send off an email probably on Monday.
Okay.
And then I said, I understand the whole vandalism thing and the reluctance to tell people where these are, but please bear in mind that most vandals do not email you with their contact information.
Exactly.
So give me a break.
Yeah.
Just tell me where this rock is. Otherwise, if you don't tell me, I'll find it.
Yep.
It might take me 8 hours. I'll find the rock. But if you tell me, you'll just save me a lot of time.
Yep.
But it's very cool. I've met some really interesting people
I bet.
doing this. And the thing is to talk to people. There's nobody better than a Native American guide.
Right.
But I chat up everybody. Generally, doing this, I'm working alone and by myself. But when I do run across a hiker, I talk to them. I talk to the BLM people. I talk to the the Park Service guys. I'll chat up the girl behind the cash register at the gift shop. Because if I can get some local information that I don't have or I can't get online, so much the better.
Exactly.
And so you work the internet, you buy the books, and then you talk to people. And then you go out and you find this
just
stuff.
like this.
Yeah, you got to talk to people.
You do. That's why I love hearing the stories. You nailed it.
So why I'm in Prescott. It's a shorter drive to this stuff from Texas. Yeah. We got 4 seasons. And there's a whole host of things. But mainly, I wanted to live in the place that I liked.
Yep.
And I didn't want to wait until I was old and retired and maybe didn't do it.
Right.
We only have so many years on this earth. Some of us get fewer than others. And I thought, if I can do business in a small town, I'm going to live in that small town.
Amen.
And the thing is, thanks to social media, I'm now in contact with like people from my high school class.
Exactly.
Well, where did these idiots get educated? Texas.
Yeah.
Oh, Dale, you live in Arizona. Isn't that hot? It's like, well, let me tell you something. Arizona is not all Phoenix.
I know. Isn't that funny?
I said, well, I live at an elevation a little over a mile.
Yeah.
They don't get that. And then I have to say, Denver, the mile-high city, mountains. Oh, yeah.
It's amazing.
They have no idea. Texas is way hotter than Arizona because it's humid.
And a lot more humid.
It's the humidity. It's the dry heat.
Yeah.
It's still hotter than hell.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why I'm not going to Moab until the end of August.
Right.
Because if I went in the middle of July,
the summer.
it's brutal.
Yep.
It's brutal. And then I got all the bicycle guys to contend with.
Yeah. You don't want to fend for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I got enough to worry about, scorpions and snakes and other critters,
You can handle that.
I can handle that. But so anyway, that's why I'm here. It's just
it's what we all say.
It's a nice
what we all
live.
say.
Yep.
If you listen to the podcast enough, you'll hear the same things over and over. So it's no longer cliche. It's just
not
the truth.
It's the truth.
Yep.
It's the truth. And well, I've been. It'll be 30.
It's almost coming up on 30 years in a couple years. Yeah.
So in the 28 years that I've lived here, when we first moved here, I didn't understand the monsoon season. Yeah. Now we don't have one.
Yeah.
We're lucky this year. Last year we had none. You know. And so with climate change and all that, I'm very, very happy to be right here.
It is a wonderful place to be.
Hell, if the seawater rises high enough, we'll have beachfront property.
We are going to be in a good situation.
We're in a good spot, yeah. we're not on any nuclear war target list.
Yeah.
And we're an hour away from an international airport, so I can literally get any place in the world, So Prescott's a nice place. I mean, we don't have a lot of museums or movie theaters or... we're a little bereft of the intellectual stimulation, but it's just down the road.
It is just down the road.
So, and last thing I'll say is I don't see my family much. There's only a few left. I had a cousin. He and his wife lived in Oklahoma.
Okay.
So the last family funeral I was at, which was back in 2017, I'm listening to my cousin's wife tell me about the wonderful, beautiful views they have in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I said, lady, I literally live down the road from the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
Don't tell me about your views in Oklahoma.
You don't know if you don't know.
I said, I can get up on Sunday morning, I can get on my motorcycle, and I can be at the restaurant at the El Tovar before it opens for lunch. Mm-hmm. That's what Arizona's like.
It's far more diverse than people think.
Yeah.
They think there's cactus on every street corner, and it's hot and there are some areas like that, but it's not where we live.
Every place has got its cliche.
Absolutely.
When I lived in Texas and I would go to travel to New York, they all thought that we rode horses and had oil wells in the backyard.
Yep.
So every place has got,
That's
some bonehead cliche about it to where if you learn about the place, it's like,
it's not true.
Not true.
Before we wrap up, I ask all my guests the same 7 questions.
Oh, boy.
You already know all the answers. Just answer with the first few things that come to mind.
Okay.
Number 1, what's your favorite thing about Greater Prescott?
The climate.
Number 2, what's your favorite restaurant in Greater Prescott?
Oh, my gosh. None of them. Houston, Texas did have outstanding restaurants, and if there's anything I miss, it's like a 5-star restaurant on all 4 corners of the intersection. I like Murphy's Bar. I like the Raven. But we've got some pretty good mom and pop places.
That's it. That's a good way to put it.
So.
Number 3, what's the number 1 thing on your Greater Prescott bucket list?
I don't have a bucket.
Okay.
I don't have a bucket. The concept of the bucket list, I find kind of strange because if you've got a bucket list, that means that you didn't fill your bucket up along the way. Yeah, so can't say I got a bucket for that.
What's one really fun thing that you have done here that maybe most of us have not yet?
I ride motorcycles, and with the great mountain roads we have here, I literally ride every Sunday.
Okay.
Get out on White Spar or 89A, go up to Jerome. I have one friend I ride with regularly. Our philosophy is eat to ride, ride to eat.
Okay.
So it's Yarnell, Baghdad, Jerome, off for breakfast and come home.
Yeah.
And where else can you leave your driveway at 6 in the morning, go out and have a breakfast in a small town, and be home before 9 o'clock?
Yep. That is one thing that I moved here thinking, I can now get a motorcycle and truly enjoy it. Whereas before we were down in the Phoenix area and it just didn't make sense.
No.
But now, so I'm for exactly what you just said is why I want a motorcycle. I don't want a daily one. I have zero interest.
Yeah.
But
I don't ride.
But just to be able to get out for an hour or two.
Well, I as a kid who grew up in the 70s, we all had mini bikes and then we had dirt bikes.
Yeah.
I rode all the time off-road as a kid, especially before I had a license. Went away to college and I got out of it for like a decade. And then I got back into it, and I was riding dirt bikes in Texas before I moved here. When I moved here, I sold the dirt bike, and I got sport bikes.
Okay.
And then 12 years ago, I sold my last dirt bike, which was a street-legal dirt bike. You didn't have to put it in the truck to take it to the riding area.
Yeah.
It had lights and horn and all that. I sold it, and I got a touring bike.
Yeah. That's what I would like as well.
Do it while you're young.
Okay.
I did it when I was 50.
Because they're big and heavy
and I got one of the lighter ones.
Okay.
I had just a Kawasaki Twin of 650cc. Wasn't a giant Goldwing or anything like that. You could do a U-turn with it, which was nice. You can't do that with a Goldwing or a big old Harley. I've been to Death Valley and Four Corners and all over Colorado on a motorcycle. And trying to do that from Texas, you got to drive 12 hours,
right?
And you're still in El Paso.
That's the great part of being where we're at.
Literally, I can jump on the bike and go to the Grand Canyon for lunch. So that's the cool thing.
Okay. Next question: what's your all-time favorite piece of art?
Oh boy. Well, of course, Salvador Dali's was it Persistence of Memory, the melting clocks.
Okay.
Because there's nothing else was ever conceived of like that before that. There's a couple of Ansel Adams pieces. One of them comes to mind is Moonrise over Hernandez, which is a photograph he shot in New Mexico, which was basically a grab shot, which is a weird thing for Uncle Ansel to do because usually he's set up for hours.
Gotcha.
I'll leave it with those two, but give me more time and I'll add to the list.
What are 3 words to describe living in Greater Prescott?
Well, since I moved here from the big city, one would be quiet. The ambient noise level is lower. Again, the climate Even
Yes.
during the monsoons or even during the heat of the summer, it's not as horrible as Phoenix or Houston or El Paso or those kind of places. And then a third great thing about the Great Prescott era is, this is a good arts destination. Sedona is known as an arts destination, but the art in Sedona is aimed at the tourist who is not really buying art with a capital A.
Gotcha.
They're buying a memento of their Southwest desert vacation.
Okay.
I think Prescott is actually a better art market than Sedona. And almost as good as Phoenix. Now, you get down to Phoenix and Scottsdale, you've got more hardcore contemporary art. But as far as landscape, decorative art, and contemporary art, Prescott has a very robust art and music scene. Let me mention music, too.
We do that. Both of those things were shocking, but I have already had, you're not the first artist. I've had a few musicians, and it is a vibrant community.
The music scene, I mean, this equals or maybe exceeds Austin, Texas.
People have said that.
Really? You've heard that before?
Yes.
It doesn't surprise me.
From music
people
deep in the music community here.
Yeah, I mean, I've shot for so many of the local bands.
Yeah.
I've done covers for Big Daddy D and the Dynamites. I've worked with Drew Hall, who's probably the busiest musician in Yavapai County. I've worked with McDougal Street West, the Peter, Paul, and Mary cover band, and I've worked with whole bunch of other ones, and so the music scene is quite robust, and the art scene is as well.
I agree.
But you got to get off of Whiskey Row. It's not all on Montezuma and Cortez
over there.
Yeah, you got. You don't have to go that far.
Right.
But it's not all concentrated around the town square either.
Yeah, I agree. Next question: if you weren't an artist or maybe a photographer, if you weren't in the arts, what type of work would you be doing?
That's a moving target, depending on the mood.
What about right now as you look back?
Actually, well, when I was a kid, I liked anything that had the word professional in front of it. Like professional photographer, professional motorcycle racer, honestly, if I wasn't, I would still sort of be in the arts. I'd be a writer.
Okay.
I think I may actually be a better writer than photographer to this day.
Okay.
I didn't get into writing until the late 80s, and I had some fits and starts at the beginning of it. And I did a little remedial work and built up my confidence. I've written for pretty much every photo magazine out there at one time. I've written 2 books. Okay. I've photographed 18 more. Yeah. But I'd probably be a writer.
Okay.
Is that far enough away from the arts to count?
Last question. Okay. What is your favorite summer activity in Greater Prescott?
Wow. Lifelong motorcyclist, although we do have a very long riding season here, so it's not just a summer thing.
Okay. That works.
I'll just say that. Yeah. I'll say that.
That works. Okay.
But
what is one question you have for me before we wrap up?
What are you doing here? And how did you get into podcasting?
Born and raised in Tucson, moved up after high school to Phoenix, went to ASU, and then 15 years later, which was just now 3 years ago, moved up here.
Oh, okay.
And it's just a slower pace of life. It's really pretty. The weather's wonderful. The community's wonderful. It's a place that my wife and I, we feel very comfortable raising our 4 kids.
Great place to raise kids.
It checks off so many boxes.
Now, your kids might be annoyed with you by the time they get to high school and they find this to be
they will.
place.
What's funny about that is now that I've talked to a lot of people my age who were born and raised here, then left, and now have come back, they're like, oh, I now get it. I didn't get it when I was a teenager.
Yeah, teenagers are, they're hardwired not to get it.
I hated Tucson when I was there growing up, but it's a nice town.
Yeah.
It's a nice town. I just like it here.
What'd you do in Phoenix before you moved here?
I've done a few different things. I worked on golf courses. I worked behavioral health. I was a realtor.
Oh, wow. So you weren't necessarily in this form of broadcasting or media?
No. And when I moved up here is when I kind of hit a stride being a realtor, or at least trying to be a realtor. Hence, I got into the marketing videos, started hearing people's stories. That is what has morphed into the podcast. It's just a long form. Let's have a conversation. And let's get the story.
Well, I'm new to the whole podcasting thing, so this has been a really interesting experience for me, and I wouldn't mind doing some of these again in the future.
They're fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
They're fun. I tell all my guests, you already know all the answers. There's no need to be nervous. I'll guide you the whole way. It's fun.
Well, I've done television before.
Yeah.
And you've got directors and producers and assistants.
Whole different can of worms.
Well, the anxiety level just goes up by leaps and bounds because you got advertisers you got to please, and it gets very, very serious.
Yes.
And so this is
my goal is to not have this be serious. It's just fun.
This is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, and I hope whoever ends up watching this
and listening
learns
absolutely.
Little
That's the whole goal.
So
yeah.
Well, and that's the great thing about YouTube, especially. I've repaired more stuff after watching YouTube videos that I probably wouldn't have tackled beforehand.
It's phenomenal. It is phenomenal.
It's like you're not going to be an expert virologist or foreign affairs expert by watching YouTube. But if you want to fix a garage door, there's a guy who's done it.
Bada boom.
Who's got a video out there.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, look at the camera and let people know your contact information. I will also include that in all the notes.
Okay. Well, the best way to contact me is through my website, which is www.dalephoto.com.
Okay. Easy enough.
You can email me or find the phone number and pick up the phone.
Okay.
And give me a call. But visit the website and you can see more of this. And you can see Bigfoot too.
Yeah. Gotta stop by and see Bigfoot. I mean, come on. Well, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
This is the podcast. It is just a conversation that people get to share about themselves, and we go off on tangents, and I love it. I'm really glad you brought this. I think this is the first time. I typically am in an art gallery. I've only been to a couple, but it's just fun to have someone here and with some of the art.
Well, it's a visual medium, and
exactly.
So this is the new thing, and this is going to be a big deal next year. I'm hoping that the show is a big success, and we can reach a lot of people.
I'm excited for Emily and I to come. I'd like to bring my kids as well.
Bring them and bring your camera.
Bring my camera. Let's wrap it up with a nice big smile. You guys, thank you very much for listening and for watching today, and have a great day.